CD4.
Her mobile buzzed on the coffee table, so she picked it up. The message was from her dad, telling her he'd be there in 10 minutes. Wow, is that the time? She told herself to get up, but her body stayed where it was. I don't feel like moving at all. Me neither. I'll probably wake up here at about 3 a.m, flanked by dogs and with a stiff neck from being squashed. Fran drained her glass, then set it on the table. Thanks for coming, Holes. It's been great to catch up. I'm so happy you're thinking seriously about staying in Penhallow Sands. Holly smiled as she finished her own wine. I know, me too. I just hope it's for the best. What's for the best is what's right for you and Luke. I don't think I actually want to leave again, Fran. She rubbed the lurcher's head, then slid carefully off the sofa, trying not to disturb him, and stood up. When she looked back at him, he was yawing and wagging his tail. He'd come home with you right now. Fran extricated herself from underneath Scamp and walked out into the hallway with Holly. I can't take on a dog at the moment, lovely as he is. Leaving him there was proving more difficult than she'd expected. She'd grown fond of the pup over the course of the evening. I know that. I need to know what my next move is, if that makes sense. Of course it does. Fran hugged her. Fran, I didn't get to explain myself properly. You distracted me with wine, food and laughter. I wanted to apologise again for running off as I did and not contacting you. I understand. I've never really been in love, but I know how you felt about Rich. Holly slid her arms into her coat, then hooked her bag over her shoulder. I keep feeling as though I've forgotten something. It's strange travelling so light after months of being responsible for a baby. She'd sent 3 texts to her dad asking after Luke during the course of the evening, and he'd replied each time that he was fine and she shouldn't worry. It was so nice to have some help, to know that there were people around who would support her with Luke. It was another wonderful bonus to being home, and reminded her how lonely she had been in Exeter. Hope everything works out for you now. Fran scuffed her socked foot on the flagstones. Don't be a stranger. Lights coming up the road shone through the glass pane to the side of the front door. I won't. I'll text you soon, and I'm looking forward to seeing what you come up with for the shop. Don't worry, I'll make some beautiful things to help you boost business at Greenacres. Holly opened the door and walked down the path to the car. Once she'd buckled her seatbelt, she turned to wave. Standing next to Fran in the pool of light was the little grey lurcher, his head on one side. If it was possible for a dog to look sad, he certainly did. Cute pup, her dad said as he pulled away. Holly nodded, unable to reply. With everything else that was going on in her life, why was she getting emotional over a dog? Holly stared at her reflection in the bathroom mirror. Bleary-eyed was an understatement, but it had been at least a year since she'd had a good drink, and the wine she'd put away last night had gone straight to her head. She ran the cold tap and splashed water over her face, shivering as droplets landed on her chest and arms. She needed coffee and carbs. Then she'd be in a better state to deal with whatever today had in store. Luke had woken once in the night, but once she'd given him a cuddle and his dummy, he'd settled again, clearly enjoying the quiet of the countryside as much as she was. It was so different to her flat in Exeter, where sirens could be heard at all times of the day and night, and her upstairs neighbours argued or played music into the early hours. The air was different here too. When she opened the window, it rushed into the room, making everything feel cleansed and refreshed. If it stayed fine, she'd get their washing out on the line in the back garden later. Line-dried laundry was always nicer than clothes dried indoors. She returned to the bedroom and lifted Luke from his cot, pressing her nose to his head and inhaling his scent. She'd know his smell anywhere. It was a part of her now. Did he have some of Rich's smell too? Was that even possible? She shook her head. It was probably silly to think so. Everyone had a unique scent, and Luke only carried some of hers because she held him all the time. But if Rich held his son regularly too, would the baby smell of him? That would be a challenge to deal with. Downstairs, her father was frying eggs and bacon. "Morning, Angel. Thought you'd appreciate a good breakfast this morning." You were right, Dad. I didn't drink much, but I don't feel great. You did seem quite merry when you got in the car, but I didn't think you were drunk. I should hope not, seeing as how I had Luke to care for. But I do feel as though there's mist on the mountain this morning. Anyway, Fran and I got chatting about Greenacres and the shop, and I think I've managed to persuade her to make us some more stock. Pottery bowls and goblets and any other ideas she has. Plus, she said she still has some painting stored, so we can have those too. Sounds wonderful. I know you think it's only a small step, Dad, but I was also thinking of setting up a website. Her dad raised his eyebrows and nodded. I'm impressed, Holly. You'll have to tell me more. I will, she smiled. But for now, this boy needs his breakfast. She made Luke a bottle, then sat down. As she was feeding him, her granny wandered into the kitchen, wearing a navy silk tea dress covered with bright red poppies, a lace and feather fascinator clipped to her bobbed hair. She shuffled over to the kettle in her slippers, and Holly caught her dad's eye. Morning, Granny. Hello, darlings. Are you going somewhere nice? Why? Well, you look very smart. Glenda peered down at her dress, then raised her hand to her head and straightened the fascinator. Yes, actually, I'm going out to lunch with the girls. Bruce frowned. The girls? Yes, of course. My book club. Who's in your book club, Granny? Holly placed the empty bottle on the table and shifted Luke on her lap. Once he was sitting upright, she cupped his chin in one hand and rubbed his back gently with the other. His little head moved and his eyes roamed the kitchen. It was as though he was taking in his surroundings, learning where everything was. Oh, Yolanda Green, Deirdre Philpott, Hetty James and others. Where are you meeting? At the library at 2. I was hoping you'd drive me, Bruce dear. Of course I will. So you're dressed this early just to be organised? She shook her head and emitted a little chuckle. I couldn't sleep, so I had a bit of a fashion show instead. I settled on this outfit, but thought I'd check what you two thought first. It's very nice, Bruce smiled at her. You look lovely. Why, thank you. I know you both think I'm going potty, but I'm still here and fully present. Well, almost. However, I do know that I need to keep my mind active. So I phoned Yolanda last night and asked if I could attend a meeting. That husband of hers, Samuel, is such a flirt. I fancied him a bit when we were younger, you know. He looked just like Marvin Gaye. Luke let out a loud belch, and Holly quickly dabbed at his chin with his bib. Granny approached the table and stroked the baby's cheek. He gazed at her intently, then reached for the fascinator and grabbed it. Ouch! Holly tried to unclip the headpiece from her granny's soft white hair. When she managed to release it, Luke's hand flew backwards and the fascinator sailed across the kitchen, landing in the frying pan and splashing oil everywhere. Granny, I'm so sorry. It's fine, darling. That's what babies are for, keeping us grounded. Luke clearly thought the lace and feathers were a bit much for book club. Bruce picked the egg-covered fascinator out of the pan and dropped it into the sink. I don't know if that can be saved, Glenda, and I'd better fry some fresh eggs too, as I prefer mine without feathers. Granny took a seat next to Holly and held out her arms for the baby. Holly gently handed him over, and then poured them all some coffee, hoping as she did so that the rest of the morning would run a bit more smoothly. Chapter 10. What's so important that you need me to come shopping, Richard? Lucinda asked from the passenger seat as they drove through the country lanes on Saturday morning. Rich glanced at her, taking in her rosy cheeks and ready smile, and realised that she probably knew already. Well, I thought you'd want to be involved, Mum, seeing as how I'm off to get some things for your grandson. Her face contorted, and he wasn't sure if she was about to laugh or cry. That's wonderful, Rich. Thank you for thinking of me. I know how you feel about him, and I want you to be part of his life too. He's your double, Rich, just like your brother was. When Dean was born, he was... Rich waited for her to finish her sentence, but she didn't, and he knew why. I can't see it, to be honest, he said. Luke just looks like a baby to me. Mostly bald except for some fluff. Small nose, big eyes, tiny hands and feet. Men, Lucinda shook her head and huffed. Your father said exactly the same thing. Typical Dad, Rich suppressed a laugh. His mother was a live wire at the best of times. But now that she had a grandchild, he wondered how she'd manage not to pop. Anyway, I'd like to pick up a few things to take over to Greenacres. This is very exciting. It is. He nodded, wanting to feel that sense of excitement, but he was still reeling from the shock of finding out he was a father. He hoped that if he embraced it with enthusiasm, it would sink in properly. Since the wake on Monday, he'd felt a bit strange, as though something was missing. Perhaps it was because he had a son, but he wasn't seeing him every day. Perhaps it was because Holly was back in Penhallow Sands, but they weren't together. And without her he felt a bit lost. So, his mum opened her bag and pulled out her new smartphone. Where do we start with baby shopping? What are you doing? I'm having a look at a few websites. Then I'll make a list to ensure we don't forget anything. I only meant a few things, Mum. Like some toys, clothes, possibly a high chair for when he's a bit bigger. Shush, Richard. Let me decide. And shush he did, because he knew that his mother needed this. She had always been a positive force in his life, but her bubbly nature had been dulled by what had happened over 20 years ago. Losing her younger son so tragically had changed her forever. And Rich missed the woman she'd once been. He'd seen flashes of the mum he'd grown up with emerging now and then, but the grief of losing her child had left her emotionally scarred. Of course it had impacted upon them all, changed them all irrevocably, so that at times it had seemed as though all hope was gone. However, with new life came fresh hope. Luke was a sign for them all that love could go on, and love could grow anew. At one point, Rich hadn't believed it was possible, but every day was a new chance, and now life had given him a surprise in the form of Luke that he wanted to fully appreciate. He just hoped he wouldn't let his son down. Rich sipped his coffee and gazed around the cafe. He'd practically had to beg his mother to stop for refreshments. Lucinda had been like a whirlwind around the shops, giving his credit and her own a thorough battering. He was dreading seeing the bill next month. But the smile on her face and the excitement flashing in her eyes made it all worthwhile. He just hoped that Holly wasn't going to be offended by the sheer amount of stuff they had bought for the baby. He was also wondering how his dad would react, seeing as how he hadn't yet spoken much about the fact that he had a grandchild. Rich suspected Rex was in shock too, and that given time, he'd come round to the idea. Perhaps, though, he was afraid to accept that he was a granddad, in case Holly left Penhallow Sands, and they lost Luke too. Of course, if she did go back to Exeter, it wasn't that far, but it wouldn't be the same as seeing her and the baby every day. And if she met someone else, it would all become a lot more complicated. "That's better," his mum exclaimed when she returned from the loo. "Thought I was going to have an accident for a moment there." He laughed. "Too much information, Mum. We could have stopped for a break sooner, you know." She settled on the round-backed, red-leather armchair opposite him and smiled. "I know, but I was having so much fun. Oh, just think, Richard, a new baby in the family. I'm so excited." He nodded. "I know." "What will you and Holly do now?" Lucinda asked, as she eyed him over her cup. "In what way?" "Well, it would be nice for Luke to have two parents around," she sniffed, "for him to have his parents together." "That's a bit traditional, Mum." "I am traditional, love. I've been with your father for over 35 years, as well you know. We had our ups and downs, some worse than others, but ultimately we made it through. People today give up too easily." "Mum, I know you mean well, but this is something I don't know the answer to. I really hurt Holly last year. I messed up and let her down. Just because we have a baby now doesn't mean she's going to want me back. Besides which, after everything that had happened, he didn't know if that would be the right thing for Holly, Luke, or himself. I know, love, but you could at least give it some consideration, for Luke's sake as much as yours. I know you still love her." He gripped his mug tightly. He did still care about Holly. He couldn't deny that. But he was afraid that he was in danger of confusing his feelings for her with something bigger. He hadn't felt that he could commit to her last year, and had run off like a coward instead of staying around to face the music. If he rushed into something again, even after he'd learned how to deal with his anxiety and his racing mind, then he could end up right back where he was before. She's a lovely person from a good family. She's clearly a great mum. Just give it some thought. Yes, Mum. Sometimes it was easier to agree with Lucinda than to try to reason with her. I can't wait to see the baby again. Do you think she'll let me visit him soon? I'm sure she will, but we must be careful not to overcrowd them or impose ourselves. This needs to be handled carefully. Holly's grieving for her grandpa and trying to settle in at Greenacres. I'm going over for lunch tomorrow, so I'll speak to her about it then. Thank you. They finished their drinks in silence, exhausted by their shopping and lost in their thoughts. Rich was glad of the chance to be still, to catch his breath. When he did meet his mum's eyes again, he was surprised to see that they were full of tears. Hey, what is it? She waved her hand, her signal to him not to fuss, that she'd be okay in a bit. Sorry, love. It's all welled up in me then. I think I need to go and see Dean. What now? Yes, love. Rich nodded. He wasn't surprised, really. Had almost been expecting it. Okay, we'll stop off on the way home. When Holly opened her eyes, it took her a few moments to register where she was. She'd returned from a walk around the vineyard feeling exhausted, so had eaten a light lunch with Granny and her dad, then taken Luke up for his nap. She'd lain on the bed and watched him for a bit as he babbled to himself before dropping off to sleep. Then she'd done some research on her phone about setting up a website for the shop. She must have fallen asleep too, because the light in the room had changed and was no longer early afternoon bright. She slid her legs over the edge of the bed and stretched, then stood up. Luke was still sleeping, so she grabbed the monitor and padded from the room and down the stairs. She made a coffee, then opened the back door. The air was cool on her face, and she shivered in her t-shirt. She should have picked up a cardigan, but she didn't want to go back upstairs and disturb Luke. So instead she fetched one of the blankets from the cupboard, then went outside and sat on the bench. From this point the land seemed endless. It was bright with spring hope at the moment, but that would soon give way to summer, then the autumn harvest. Holly had always enjoyed watching the seasons change at Greenacres. It was comforting, solid and reassuring. They would continue to change whatever happened to her or her family. This land would be here long after she had gone, and perhaps one of her descendants would be running the vineyard then. Or would they? If things were looking as gloomy as her dad seemed to think, then one day soon the vineyard might well close, the land sold to developers and turned into housing estates. The beautiful rich earth could be marred with concrete, the area heavily populated, and in a matter of decades it would be unrecognisable. The thought was heartbreaking. She'd seen it happen before, to local farms and to other vineyards along the Cornish coast, and it had made her shiver. But she'd never thought it could happen here. Grandpa had been so certain that he'd never sell the vineyard, that it would continue to thrive, and that it would be Holly's future, and there for her children too. But Grandpa was gone, and with him his determination, as well as his refusal to see the truth of the matter. Without some serious planning, the vineyard might not continue to be a viable business. Holly covered her mouth and blinked hard. If she left and returned to Exeter, she'd be turning her back on this life, taking it away from her son. She couldn't do that to him. He might not want to run the family business when he was older, but if it wasn't here, he wouldn't even have that option. She wrapped her hands around her mug. There were ways to make money, to help the vineyard thrive without surrendering any of the land. She'd go inside and get her dad's laptop, then make a start on that website immediately. She'd made some notes about what to include, and had got some good ideas from her research. So now was as good a time as any. Rich parked in the church car park and got out. Apart from Holly's grandpa's funeral, he hadn't been here in years. He hadn't been able to face it, but had known when he returned recently that he'd have to make the trip at some point. It was inevitable. Perhaps coming here with his mum was how it was meant to be. He walked around the car and helped her out. It was her car, but she liked him to drive it when they went out, so she could check her phone. And anyway, she'd been a bit emotional after their shopping trip. Then they made their way through the gates and around to the back of the church. The original graveyard dated back over 200 years, but it had been extended to allow for more recent burials. His mum slid her arm through his, and he looked at her. She'd blanched and was clutching her other hand to her chest. He wished he could reassure her, tell her that it was okay, but the words were trapped in his throat. They took the winding path and veered left. And there it was, exactly the same as it had been 20 years earlier. The earth seemed to shift under him as they stood there, and he gripped his mum's arm tighter, sucking in shallow breaths to try to stabilise himself. Then, as if by magic, he heard the mantra the counsellor in Ibiza had used to help him deal with the anxiety attacks. Feel the fear, and do it anyway. He closed his eyes and repeated the words, letting them swirl around in his head, then flood through his core and his limbs, loosening the tension until it evaporated and was swept away on the breeze. Death was inevitable, he told himself. Not so early for most, thank goodness. But it was an unavoidable part of the human condition. He couldn't live his life in fear. Not anymore. He felt to blame for what had happened to Dean, and for how his parents had suffered. If it hadn't been for Rich, Dean would still be here. A grown man, possibly with a family of his own. Rich had wished thousands of times that he could turn the clock back, that he could change his mind about heading out into the sea, that he could persuade Dean not to follow him as he always had done. Letting go of that yearning to change what had happened was so hard. Sometimes he could rationalise it. Other days he couldn't. Healing was a tough process. He was learning gradually to treasure every day and to seize life, to enjoy the sensation of the breeze on his face, the bitterness of black coffee, the thrill as he dived into cold water and it caressed his skin. He had a child now, a precious gift, and although he might experience fear, anger and pain, he couldn't allow them to rule him. Next to him his mum sniffed, so he wrapped his arm around her shoulders and pulled her close. "I'm here, Mum. I love you." She leant on him and her shoulders shook. Lucinda, the woman who had been strong throughout his life, who had refused to show the full extent of her pain, or to crumble in front of her family, was now finding strength in him. Chapter 11. Holly glanced at the clock for the 10th time that hour. She'd texted Rich that lunch would be served around 1, and it was already gone noon. Her dad was in charge of Sunday lunch, but she was trying to help, seeing as how she'd invited a guest. She'd been up since 6 working on the website, tweaking pages and images, setting up widgets and contact details, and it was coming along nicely. Granny was in the lounge with Luke, watching over him as he lay on his playmat. Again, Holly was aware of how comforting it was to have other people around, to have some help. Granted, she'd never bothered making a full roast for herself, as it seemed extravagant and over the top. When she'd been younger, their Sunday lunches had been big affairs, with Grandpa at one end of the dining table and Granny at the other, Mum and Dad together, then Holly on the other side, often with guests. Sometimes Rich had been there too. They had talked and laughed, celebrated successes and commiserated over failures, and there had been a strong sense of family unity. Then Mum had passed away, and it had changed. They'd still eaten lunch together, but an important part of their family dynamic was gone. It had affected them all. Holly had seen the same thing happen to Rich and his family after they lost Dean. Their shared understanding of loss was one of the things that should have made her and Rich closer, but at times it had seemed to take him away from her, and she couldn't work out why. But then grief was different for everyone, so she had tried to be understanding and to support Rich in the way he supported her. Today Luke would be there at the table. He wouldn't be eating the roast lunch, of course, but he would be present. Holly wished her mum was here to see that. She'd have loved having her grandson in the room, would have adored the beautiful baby. It made her heart ache. She shook her head. Nothing would change the past. Nothing would bring her mum back. And this wasn't helping with her rising nerves. She shouldn't be nervous. Rich had been here numerous times before. But she was. Because this time it was all very different. "Holly, don't worry, everything's under control." Her dad squeezed her shoulder. "I know. I don't know why I'm feeling so anxious." "Because this matters to you, and that's fine. There's plenty of food and plenty of good wine, so we'll have a lovely lunch. It's good that Rich is coming over." "Yes, I know." She bit her lip. She hadn't told her dad that she suspected Rich had a girlfriend, not wanting to complicate matters even further, but the knowledge would be there. The elephant at the periphery of the room. Although Sam had looked nothing like an elephant, she was completely stunning. And anyway, as Holly had already told herself, it was none of her business. She went through to the dining room and checked the table. Crockery, cutlery, glasses. Yes, everything was there. She was organised and could relax. Couldn't she? She was about to go and check on Luke when she heard a car pulling up outside. He was early. She rushed through to the kitchen, her stomach fluttering wildly, then out the door to see Rich parking next to the Range Rover at the side of the house. He got out, then Lucinda climbed out too. Holly paused. What was Rich's mum doing here? Not that she wasn't welcome, but she hadn't been invited. It didn't matter, as there was plenty of food, but... "Hi!" Holly waved as she approached them. It dawned on her that she hadn't checked her appearance before coming outside. She'd washed her hair that morning in the shower and slicked on some lip balm, as well as some moisturiser that was meant to give her skin a healthy glow, but that had been the extent of her beautification. Not that it mattered, because who did she want to look beautiful for? "Hello, Holly." Lucinda approached her and gave her a tentative hug. "I hope you don't mind, but I came to help Rich deliver the things we bought for the baby. I won't stay long, and I promise I'm not here to bother you." "Sorry?" "I said I'm not here to make a nuisance of myself. No, not that. You said you bought things for Luke." "Yes, love." Lucinda's eyebrows met above her nose. "Oh gosh, have I overstepped the mark? I only wanted to do something nice and I... No, it's fine. I'm just surprised." Holly smiled. "Nicely surprised." "Thank goodness for that. I would have hated to upset you." Lucinda's hand flew to her ample chest as she added quietly, "Again." "Hi." Rich appeared at her side, carrying a large box wrapped in blue paper with silver bows printed on it. Holly tore her eyes away from his face as she felt her colour rising. It was almost as if she kept forgetting how handsome he was. His dark eyes seemed to bore right through her. And his freshly shaven face, white shirt and fawn chinos combined to create the image of Rich she had adored. How could he make such a simple outfit look so appealing? The scent that drifted over her was fresh and woody, cinnamon and bark, masculine and rousing. Damn him! Why couldn't he wear a sack and a balaclava and douse himself in antiseptic or cow poo or something? Lucinda had gone to the boot and hefted out another large box, wrapped in the same blue paper. "A few things, that's all." "Goodness me, thank you. Shall I take that one?" Holly stared at the boxes. "No, it's all right. Rich can carry them all in. Can I come and say hello to your father and your granny?" "Of course." Holly glanced at Rich as Lucinda slid an arm through hers and walked with her towards the house. She had a feeling that by father, Lucinda actually meant son. And that was fine with her. In the kitchen, the aromas of roast lunch greeted them, and Lucinda sniffed appreciatively. "That smells good, Bruce." "Lucinda!" Bruce turned from the sink where he was draining carrots and grinned. "Great to see you. Have you come for lunch?" "No, not at all, though the idea is tempting. I just came to help Rich with some things we bought for the baby." "You must stay. We have plenty to go around. Is Rex with you?" She shook her head. "Left him in front of the snooker." "Well, call him and tell him to come over. I insist." Bruce left the colander on the draining board and gave Lucinda a kiss on the cheek. "The more the merrier." "Are you sure?" "Absolutely." "Then I shall." She looked at Holly. "If that's okay with you." "Of course." Holly nodded. It might help them to build some all-important bridges. Lucinda pulled her mobile from her bag and spoke quickly to her husband. "He'll be here in about 15 minutes. That okay?" "Perfect." "Would you like to come and see Luke?" Holly asked. "Yes, please," Lucinda nodded, her eyes bright with anticipation. They went through to the lounge and found Granny kneeling on the floor next to the playmat. She was trying to unbutton Luke's tiny jeans, but was struggling. "These are so fiddly. Luke, dear, do stop wriggling so your great-granny can get you undone." "Granny!" Holly rushed to her side. "It's fine, let me." She suppressed a giggle. If she left Granny trying to change Luke, they could end up with a dreadful mess, and right before lunch too. "I could tell he was filling his nappy, so I thought I'd save you a job and change him, but I can't even do that." Holly helped the old lady to her feet. "The poppers are fiddly, but the jeans look so cute on him. You'd be fine changing him when he's wearing his dungarees or his little jogging bottoms." Granny nodded. "I doubt that, but thank you for trying to make me feel better. Does your father need any help in the kitchen?" "I think he's managing. Rich has arrived, along with Lucinda." Holly gestured at Rich's mum, who was standing in the doorway wringing her hands, as if trying to stop herself interfering. "Oh, hello, Lucinda, dear. I didn't see you there. I was so intent on my mission to clean up the poop." Lucinda gave a nervous giggle. "Hi, Glenda. How are you?" Holly knew she was wondering how Granny was coping without Grandpa. "I'm fine, dear. I have these two here to keep me busy now. I'll go and see if I can help in the kitchen." Granny tottered off, and Lucinda knelt by Holly in front of the playmat. Granny had placed the changing bag next to Luke, so Holly quickly changed him, hoping Lucinda wouldn't be put off by the nuclear-grade stench. But as she popped the nappy into a bag and tied the top, she sneaked a glance at Lucinda, to find her gazing at Luke with an adoring expression on her face. "Are you okay to watch him while I take this out and wash my hands?" Holly asked. "Of course, I'd be honoured." Lucinda reached out and placed her hand on Holly's shoulder. "Thank you, sweetheart. I know this must be difficult." "It's fine," Holly smiled. "We all need to get along now more than ever." She didn't know if the hurt she'd felt at Lucinda's words would ever leave her, but she also knew that staying angry and bitter wouldn't help anyone. She took the bag through to the kitchen, leaving Rich's mum alone with her grandchild for the very first time. When she returned to the lounge, Lucinda was sitting on the couch with Luke lying across her knees. She was chatting away to him, and he was cooing and babbling in his very cute way. Holly stood in the doorway watching them, and her heart expanded. She'd once read that children could never have too many people to love them. And here at Greenacres, Luke would have that joy. Her fears that Lucinda wouldn't think her baby was good enough slowly dissipated like smoke on the breeze, and she felt herself relax. She was a natural with him, and from the look on her face, she already loved him. Holly quietly backed out of the doorway. She'd let them have some time to get to know each other, to form a bond that she knew would benefit them both. Lucinda was a good person, and she'd been through her fair share of suffering. Hopefully being with Luke would help her to heal. The happy, good-humoured baby had a way of helping those around him to feel better. She'd seen it this week, as her granny had spent time with him, and her dad had doted upon him. Now Luke had a whole extended family to care for him, and there was a wonderful sense of security in that. She was glad Lucinda had come to Greenacres with Rich today, and glad that Rex would soon join them. Then they could eat as a family and start to put the past behind them. Thinking of lunch, Holly hoped that her Yorkshire puddings would rise properly. It was the one job Dad had allowed her to do, and no one liked flat Yorkshire puddings. "Well, this is nice," Bruce said as he gazed around the table. "It is indeed lovely to have company." Granny picked up her wine glass. "I would like to make a toast." Everyone raised their own glasses, and Holly noticed that her granny's was wobbling. It must be difficult having guests round, with it being the first time since she'd lost her husband. There would be many firsts, but Holly knew that Granny would face each one with the same courage and determination. It made her feel that she should do the same. To present company, and, of course, to absent friends. Granny pressed her lips together and blinked hard, before taking a long drink of her red wine. "Absent friends," they all responded, then clinked glasses. "Thank you so much for inviting us," Rex said. "Our pleasure," Bruce nodded. "It's lovely to cook for company." They all filled their plates with meat and vegetables. Then Holly held her breath as the Yorkshire puddings made the rounds. "I have to apologise for the Yorkshires." She got there before anyone could comment. "I opened the oven too soon and they, collapsed." "They look fabulous." Rex stabbed one with his fork, then placed it next to his potatoes. "Lovely and golden." "But like Frisbees," Holly grimaced. "Holly, sweetheart, you are many things, but a great cook has never been one of them." Her dad smiled at her. "And what does it matter?" "Not at all." Glenda patted Holly's hand, where it sat on the table. "She has other talents, and at least she tries." Holly met Rich's eyes across the table, and his smirk made her own laughter bubble. It was as though they were teenagers again, being patronised by their parents. So what if she couldn't cook? She could do the basics. And besides, Rich had always been better in the kitchen than her. So she'd let him and her dad crack on. Rich's mouth widened into a grin, and Holly couldn't help it. She laughed out loud. It was as though the tension of sitting around the table had built up, and now it could no longer be contained. Lucinda looked from Holly to Rich, then back again, and released a giggle. "Is everything all right?" Granny asked, her fork poised in mid-air. "I didn't fart, did I?" That made Holly and Rich laugh even more, and soon everyone around the table had joined in. When they finally fell quiet, and Holly's sides were aching, Granny spoke again. "I do that sometimes, you know, especially when I sneeze, and I'm not always aware of it. Grandpa was always telling me off, but I swear that sometimes it was him, and he used me as a scapegoat. 'Glenda,' he'd say, 'ladies don't fart out loud.'" "Oh, Granny, stop!" Holly shook her head. "What? But why?" Glenda looked surprised, but Holly suspected she knew what she was doing. An occasion like this was bound to be tense. A good laugh would help get rid of any residual tension and make them all far more comfortable. After lunch, Rich and Rex loaded the dishwasher, and Holly made coffee, which they took through to the lounge. Rex sat on the sofa cuddling Luke with Lucinda next to him. "How about opening some of those baby things?" Lucinda asked. "Good idea, Mum." Rich drained his coffee, then got up and went through to the dining room, where they'd piled the boxes before lunch. When he returned, he was carrying 2 packages, which he set on the floor in front of Holly. "There you go." She looked at Rich, then at his parents, feeling suddenly shy. "Go on, Holly, please." Lucinda gestured at the parcels. "Thank you. You didn't need to do this, but we are grateful, aren't we, Luke?" Her son was currently patting Rex's chin and humming at him. She tore the blue paper away to find a bottle sterilizer. "Oh, thank you." "I know you probably have one already, but we thought it's always handy to have a spare," Lucinda said, "and it's top of the range." Holly nodded. It was the one she'd originally wanted, but hadn't bought, as she was trying to be careful with money. Rich handed her the next parcel, which she opened to find a set of bottles and dummies. They were decorated with cartoon polar bears and foxes, and were designed for babies of 3 months and above. "Again, thank you, these are lovely." "Hold on." Rich left the room again, and returned with 2 larger boxes. When he placed them next to Holly, she released a breath she hadn't known she'd been holding. This was all proving to be quite emotional. She wasn't used to being the centre of attention either, and she was terrified of not seeming grateful, or of appearing not to like the gifts. "Holly," Rich put his hand over hers, and she met his warm eyes. "No pressure. We kept the receipts. Anything you don't like or have a double of, we can return and get something else." He leaned closer and whispered, "Mum just really wanted to get a few things, and it made her so happy." Holly nodded. The 2 large boxes contained an expensive high chair with a beautiful giraffe motif, and a battery-powered baby rocker that played lullabies, and also had an activity centre for Luke to play with. There was also a baby carrier that Holly, or Rich, could wear like a rucksack. Rich finished off with some softer parcels that contained nappies, vests, pyjamas and little outfits. "It's like a baby shower," Holly said, as she gazed at the piles of things around her. "Did you have one of those?" Lucinda asked. She shook her head. Rich knelt on the floor next to her chair. She was in Exeter, alone. Oh, goodness, Holly, with no one to look out for you. Lucinda pouted. If only I'd known. If only I'd not been such a horrid old bag, then you might not have left. It's okay, Lucinda, Holly nodded. It's all in the past. We're home now. Seeing Lucinda's guilt made her sad, and she didn't want to add to it. She suddenly felt claustrophobic in the lounge, in need of some time out. Do you fancy getting some fresh air? Rich asked, as if reading her mind. What about Luke? We can watch him, Lucinda said, then looked up. Us grandparents together. I'd like to get a head start on putting some of these fab baby gadgets together, Holly's dad said, picking up the box for the rocker. As long as you're sure. Holly stood up, then went and gave Luke a kiss. The bottles are in the kitchen. He's due one about... It's okay, Halls. Bruce held up a hand. I know the feeding times now, and how to make up the bottles. I used to make up 6 and stick them in the fridge, Lucinda said. Then I'd warm them as needed. We're not allowed to do that these days. Bruce shook his head. One at a time only, but Holly has this fab machine that makes them almost instantly. I'll show you how to use it. Looks like you've got the grandparenting thing covered then. Holly walked to the door. Any problems? I've got my mobile and we won't be long, will we, Rich? Not at all. An hour at most. Holly went out to the hallway and stuck her feet into her trainers, then located the wax jacket she'd had since she was 16. As she slid her arms into the sleeves, the smell reminded her of the past. The jacket had been stored in the cupboard under the stairs, where her granny hung lavender pomanders and mothballs, and the aromas permeated everything they kept in there. You ready? Rich asked. Yes, and thank you. What for? For getting me out. It's wonderful having everyone around, but I was starting to feel a bit... It's okay, I understand. I needed a break too. Glad it wasn't just me. Do you have a coat? I threw one into the car just in case. I could see there were some clouds coming in earlier, so I thought it best to be on the safe side. Outside, Holly waited for Rich to get his coat. Then he joined her and they headed across the yard and through the gate to the vineyards. They walked in silence, not discussing where they were going, being led by habit and the past. They circled the exterior of the vineyards until they reached the next gate, and the next. Then they were in an open field. Holly enjoyed the sensation of the fresh air on her skin, relieved to be outdoors, where she always felt that she could breathe properly. They walked side by side up a slight incline to the hiking path. You were right about those clouds. Holly peered up at the darkening sky. Perhaps we should turn back, she suggested reluctantly. We'll be fine, Halls. Can we keep going for a bit? Okay. My parents are absolutely delighted, you know. It's lovely to see them so happy. It means so much to see Mum smile like that. It reminds me of how she looked when I was growing up. She has a sparkle in her eyes, doesn't she? He nodded. It's because of you. Me? Yes. You brought Luke back. Rich, I came back for Grandpa's funeral. And for no other reason? She thought about it as she walked along. When she'd been planning to return for the funeral, had she on some level been considering coming home for good? Had she been hoping to see Rich? She certainly hadn't thought Lucinda would apologise to her like that. I don't know, to be honest, although I knew that you and Luke needed to meet as soon as possible. Now that I'm here, though, it's so much better than I thought it would be. Everything seems different. Do I seem different? Yes. How so? You don't look so... pained. He laughed. It's not funny, I know, but did I really look that bad? Before you left, you looked as though you were carrying the weight of the world on your shoulders. The drinking, the late nights, the sadness in your eyes. It was hard to witness. I've tried not to think about all that, and it seems like it was years ago. But it was so painful to watch you trying to destroy yourself. I could barely admit to myself that it was happening. I thought that once we had our own home, you'd be happier. I hoped that I could make you happy. I'm so sorry you saw me like that. It wasn't your fault. Not directly, anyway. Rich did look so much better now. She hadn't been able to pinpoint what the difference was at first, but now it was clear. He had a glow about him, as if something inside had been repaired, and he was getting back to how he always should have been. She had a feeling that she knew why, though, that it might be linked to Sam, and that knowledge was hard to deal with. "How far shall we go?" She gazed across the fields. She felt the moisture in the air on her cheeks and her forehead. Rain was definitely on the way. "A bit further." "You want to go there? If that's okay with you." She stopped walking. "I'm not sure. I haven't been there since that day." "It'll be okay, Holly, I promise." He held out his hand, and she looked at it for a moment before taking it. This probably wasn't wise, but for a while, even just an hour or so, she wanted to feel as though everything between her and Rich was good. He had been her friend, not just her lover, and she had missed him. It had taken being back in his company for her to realise exactly how much. He was making an effort here, and although she didn't know exactly what he wanted from her, she needed to believe that he wouldn't hurt her again. In fact, she knew that she wouldn't let him. Chapter 12. Rich wasn't 100% sure that he was doing the right thing heading to Plumtree Cottage, but when they'd decided to go for a walk, he hadn't been able to push the idea from his mind. It might be a big mistake, but something inside him was propelling him forward, encouraging him to try this, to see how Holly responded, to see how he responded himself. They walked side by side, occasionally brushing against each other as they moved to avoid a rock or a cowpat, and it felt natural to be with Holly again. She'd always been so easy to get along with. Not at all high maintenance, like some of the other girls he'd briefly dated at high school. Holly was special. Back last year, their relationship had reached a point where making a commitment had seemed inevitable. Holly had needed more from Rich, and he'd felt in a place to offer that, or at least he'd thought he had. Moving in together had seemed the sensible next step. Until that point, they'd been happy enough flitting between Greenacres and Rich's parents' home, enjoying the freedom of having money in their pockets and being able to save. They'd each had an ISA, having agreed that it would be a good idea to put a deposit away for when they eventually found a property they both liked. Then Rich had ruined it, because his head hadn't been in the right place after all. He glanced at Holly, and shame crawled over his skin. She was lovely, and he'd let her down so badly. If only he'd gone away to Ibiza before they'd decided to buy the cottage. She'd had no words for him after that, had cut him from her life completely, except for the child she was carrying. Pain pierced his heart just as lightning flashed in the sky far out at sea. If she had decided to terminate the pregnancy, he would have had no right to argue with her decision. He hadn't been there for her, so why would she have thought he'd be there for their child? But she hadn't done that. In her usual determined way, she had kept on going, delivered their baby, and brought him through this first few months of life. She was incredible. He'd known he had feelings for Holly, but his issues had prevented him from opening his heart properly. Seeing her now, with his child and his parents, and being able to fully appreciate what a strong woman she was, brought everything to the surface. Whether or not she would ever care about him again as she once had, remained to be seen. They reached the end of the field, and the hedgerow thickened as they neared the stile. Rich waited for Holly to climb over, then followed her, his newfound knowledge settling in his stomach like a lead weight. He had lost something very precious when he let Holly go. They could never go back to how things had been, and it wouldn't be right to want that. But he felt certain that they could move forward and create something different, something new, in whatever form that might be. Holly had known where they were going, but even so, when she climbed over the stile and saw the little cottage, with its stunning sea view and glorious surroundings, her breath caught in her throat. She hadn't come back here since that day, and hadn't thought she ever would. But then she hadn't even known if she would return to Greenacres, and look how that was working out. Rich joined her again, and they waded through the long grass, descending gradually until they reached the point where the land evened out. The gravel road that ran past the cottage clearly hadn't been used in some time, as weeds and grass were reclaiming it, poking up through the stones of various shapes and sizes. The closer they got, the faster her heart pounded, and the more she wondered if this was a good idea. Surely too many emotions had been played out here. Love, hope, passion, sadness, anger and despair. And yet seeing the old stone cottage again brought whispers of hope to her heart. She'd once loved this place so much, adored its fat chimney, blue shutters and small paned windows set into thick walls. It was so sturdy and strong, a fortress against the elements. It had a dry stone wall at the front, creating a small square garden that had once boasted beautiful borders full of flowers. As she looked at the borders now, her heart sank to see them choked with weeds and litter, cider cans and cigarette packets, likely left there by teenagers from the village. The path leading from the wooden gate to the cottage was also strewn with weeds. One of the front windows had 3 broken panes, and the shutter to the right hung from its hinges at an awkward angle, as if someone had tried to rip it off. They reached the gate, and Holly felt Rich's hand on her shoulder. "Are you okay?" She nodded. "Do you want to go in?" She turned to him. "Not really. I don't think so anyway. What would be the point?" The air between them fizzed with tension, buzzing with unsaid words, with wasted time. A crack of thunder overhead made them jump, and Holly screeched. When she realised what had happened, she started to laugh. "That was really loud," Rich laughed with her. Then it came, as it often did so close to the sea. Rain. Large droplets pelted them as if the heavens had quite literally opened directly above them, and within seconds they were soaked. Lightning flashed, too close for comfort, and thunder boomed again. "Come on." Rich grabbed Holly's hand and led her through the gate and up the path to the front door. He tried the handle, but it was locked. So he gently pushed her further under the porch roof, so that her back was against the front door. "Wait here." "Where are you going?" "I'll be back in a few minutes." He disappeared around the side of the building. The rain had come so quickly that Holly hadn't pulled her hood up or zipped her jacket, and now the front of her top was wet, and rain had trickled down her neck and into the back of her jeans. She was cold, and it was a fair walk back to the vineyard. In any case, it wouldn't be a good idea to venture out until the storm had blown over. Panic rose inside her as she thought about Luke. She'd never been separated from him before, except for the evening she'd gone to Fran's. But no, Luke would be fine. He was with his doting grandparents and had everything he needed, except for her. Irritation niggled as she questioned her decision to walk here with Rich. What had she been thinking? A noise behind her made her turn to face the door, which opened, revealing Rich. "How did you—" The key was still under the plant pot next to the back door. "I'm surprised the local kids haven't been inside, but it looks pretty tidy in there, to be honest." Holly entered the hallway and closed the door behind her. "This feels wrong." "Why?" "Well, it's breaking and entering." "No one's lived here in ages." "I know, but someone still owns it." "Someone who doesn't care that much about it." The air in the hallway was stale and damp, as if it hadn't been disturbed in months. It reminded Holly of the old church hall, which smelt that way even though it was used quite regularly. To their left and right were 2 reception rooms. Straight ahead was the staircase, and beyond that the kitchen. Holly could have found her way around blindfolded. The layout was emblazoned on her mind. She'd walked through the cottage so many times in her imagination, thinking of colour schemes and picturing how happy they would be when it became their home. She'd thought about how she would furnish the reception rooms, the 3 double bedrooms, the hallway and the kitchen. She'd even been to the DIY superstore and picked out paint. Rich had let her go that far, then torn her dreams to shreds. Anger flickered inside. Why had he been so cruel? "Come through to the kitchen, and I'll see if I can light a fire." She nodded, unable to speak, and followed him, watching as he rooted around in the kitchen cupboards for some matches. Eventually he located a box in the cupboard under the sink, then knelt in front of the grate and peered up the chimney. "I think it's clear enough up there, but we'll soon see." "It would have been swept about a year ago, wouldn't it?" She found her voice and tried to unclench her jaw to get the words out clearly. "I'm sure I recall the estate agents saying something about having it done before they put the cottage on the market. It might be all right then." Rich had already found some old newspapers, and there were logs in the bucket next to the fireplace. While he lit the fire, Holly pulled 2 chairs over from the table in the corner. The previous owner had left some furniture in the property. Holly had thought it had a certain charm, and suspected some of it might be antique. It would at least have helped to create that eclectic feel that she liked in properties, where things didn't match, but rather worked together to create a cosy, homely feel. The table and chairs were solid and built to last, not like some of the flimsy designer furniture she'd seen in shops and online. Rich came and sat next to her, and they gazed at the fire, watching as the flames licked at the dry logs, and soon took hold, coaxing the wood into creating heat that spread out into the room. "We should soon dry off." "Not if we go back out in that." Holly nodded at the window, where the rain was coming down in sheets so thick that the back garden was a complete blur. "Guess we'd better stay here for a bit, at least until the storm blows over." "I could always ring Dad and ask him to come for us." "What, and disturb his baby chair building?" "You're right," Holly nodded. "He's probably having a great time." "Might be best if they don't know that we came here anyway." Rich worried his bottom lip. "Why did we come here?" Holly tried to push her anger away. It clouded her judgment and wouldn't help with working out a way for Rich to be Luke's dad. He stood up and removed his jacket, then hung it over the back of the chair before sitting back down again. He looked around the kitchen, and Holly followed his gaze, taking in the cupboard doors that would have looked at home in a wartime drama, the flagstone floor that needed a good sweep, and the apron-fronted sink with a big crack in the front. It needed some TLC, and Holly had once thought that she and Rich would be the ones to provide that care and attention. "Holly, I wanted to bring you here to say sorry. You've already apologised, Rich." She was glad that he had said sorry, but she also felt that words would never be able to take away the hurt she had felt. It would be Rich's actions from now on that would matter, and that would take time. "I have. But I have more to say. Far more, in fact." Holly shivered. "Are you cold?" "A bit." "Take your jacket off and you'll dry quicker." She knew he was right, but exposing the bare skin of her arms to the air went against her instinct to hunch over and stay under that extra layer. "I've seen it on survival programs, I promise." Holly reluctantly removed her coat and hung it over the back of the chair as Rich had done, then shuffled closer to the fire. Rich did the same and reached out to her. "What are you doing?" she bristled. "Body heat. It'll help." "No, I don't." Even as she protested, she knew he was right, and although she didn't think they were in danger of suffering from hypothermia, she was very cold. If she could just push her pain aside for a moment, she could allow Rich close to warm her up. A voice at the back of her mind screamed that it was foolish, but her chattering teeth silenced it. Rich couldn't believe he was holding Holly again. His heart was pounding, and his mouth had dried up completely. He wanted to tell her again how sorry he was, but he didn't know if he'd be able to speak at all. So for a while he simply held her close, leaning his chin on the top of her head, and just enjoying being with her. This was how it should have been. He should have been living here, in this cottage with her and Luke now, a happy family under their own pretty little roof. He'd been such an idiot. "Holly," his voice emerged as barely more than a whisper. "That day last year, your grandpa's birthday, I was wrong to leave." She moved away slightly so she could look at him. "Why did you go?" It had been building for a while. I think it was the anniversary looming, and the fact that my life was moving on that meant I just lost it. Her eyes were filled with pain as they roamed his face. "I can understand that, of course I can. But I would have helped you if you'd spoken to me, if you'd shared your feelings honestly rather than shutting down." He sighed, wishing she'd snuggle into him again, yearning for her to make the sadness vanish for a while, as only she could. "I know I should have spoken to you about it, but I was so wrapped up in my own grief and guilt that I couldn't let go. I couldn't vocalize how I felt. But you can now?" "I've been learning how to talk about it. I'm not fully comfortable with it, but I'm trying to be more open." Holly watched him, her eyes wary. "When I left, I went to Ibiza, thinking I'd have a lad's holiday that I'd drink and party and forget. But it didn't quite work like that." She had stiffened in his arms. "I met Sam out there and— oh!" Holly dropped her gaze to the fire, and he watched as the glow flickered across her features, highlighting the curves of her cheekbones and making shadowy hollows of her eyes. "She's been good to me. She's worked with mental health charities and has experience as a counsellor herself, and she seemed to understand what I was going through. And I didn't." Holly was on her feet now, her arms folded tightly across her chest. "I was there all the time, Rich. Or did you forget that? I saw how it affected you. I thought we had something good. It seems I was wrong." He shook his head. "No, you weren't wrong at all. I cared for you, Holly. But sometimes it was as if we were too close to talk about it. Well, you have Sam now, don't you?" Rich felt his jaw drop. No, it's not like that. Sam isn't my girlfriend." "Oh? You thought she was?" Holly shrugged. "I wasn't sure. She's a friend, nothing more." "It's none of my business, Rich." Holly's voice sounded flat, as if she couldn't care one way or the other. "We knew each other from uni. Then we bumped into each other in Ibiza, and I stayed at her family's villa. She helped me find a good counsellor, and I started unburdening myself. I couldn't put it all on you, Holes. I felt weak for dealing with things so badly. I was full of self-loathing, and it took me some time to come out of that. But now, I'm almost out the other side. I'm still sad, really sad that it happened, but I'm rebuilding, and coming home was the first step in my recovery. I needed a break to escape Penhallow Sands for a while, but the way I did it was wrong." Holly rubbed her eyes. "Can you forgive me for being such an idiot?" "It's not just about us now, Rich. We have to think about Luke, and I can't have him hurt or messed around." "I won't hurt you. Either of you." Holly took his hand and stepped towards him. "I'm not making any promises, Rich. I'm not asking you to. I just want to try to make it up to you in some way. I can't bear to spend the rest of my life knowing that I hurt you and didn't do anything to make it better." Rich didn't know what he could do to prove himself, but he knew that he wanted to see Holly and their son happy and settled. He needed to work out how he could make that happen. Holly walked to the window and peered out at the sky. "I think the rain has stopped." Holly slid her arms into her jacket. It wasn't fully dry, but it was better than when they'd arrived at the cottage. Her head was muggy with emotion, and she could have lain down on the floor, closed her eyes and slept. As Richard held her in front of the fire, his strong arms wrapped around her, it would have been so easy to tilt her chin upwards and find his mouth with hers, to undress him slowly and make love to him. Part of her wished that he'd take over and peel away her clothes, then kiss her as he used to do. But the other part, the sensible, rational part, was screaming at her to walk away and pull herself together. Rich might say he'd changed. He certainly seemed genuine about it, and he had been through a dreadful experience that would test the strongest of people. But even so, he'd had so many chances to love her the way she wanted and deserved to be loved. It was her fault too. She'd been a doormat, allowed things to drift without any real, solid commitment. Lots of couples moved in together far earlier than 3 years into their relationship. Of course, there had been Grandpa to think of, but she had stood up to him on that one. And Granny and Dad had reassured him that she and Rich had been together long enough to make an adult decision. Marriage hadn't been something she'd worried about. But she had wanted to live with Rich and to have their own space where they could be alone together. They'd had the money saved for a deposit, and the time had been right. Then Rich had ruined it all. Holly had her own fears and sadness too. Losing her mum had rocked her world, and Rich had been there for her through that. She'd clung to him many times as she cried, and he'd made her mugs of hot chocolate in the early hours when she'd woken in tears, having dreamt that her mum was there, before realising she was gone. Rich had been a friend and a lover. He'd been in many ways her rock. But when it came down to it, he just couldn't give her the commitment and stability she craved. That was why she'd been so confused about him, and about them. He'd said he couldn't commit, but he'd been there. Always. Until that day. And now he was asking for a chance to prove himself. He said he'd been working things through, that with Sam's help, he'd begun the healing process in Ibiza. It hurt that Sam had been able to do what Holly hadn't, but perhaps he had needed the space to pour his feelings out in different surroundings. Holly was caught in a paradox of emotion. On one hand, she felt jealous that another woman had helped Rich. On the other hand, she was grateful to Sam because Rich had needed support. And now? He wasn't asking Holly to move in with him or to marry him, or for any type of commitment other than allowing him to be part of Luke's life. She would give him the chance to be a father to Luke. It was what they both deserved. As for herself, she didn't know if she'd ever be able to trust Rich with her heart again. He'd said he wanted to make it up to her, that he couldn't bear to know he'd hurt her and not put things right. But she had no idea what to expect from him. She thought she'd known him once. She'd been wrong. She didn't know if she could open herself up enough to love him again.
End of CD 4. CD 5.
Chapter 13. The next 5 days passed in a haze of establishing a new routine for Luke. A routine that involved having more people around in new surroundings. It was wonderful to have helping hands and people to go to for advice, and Holly could see that Luke was enjoying it too. His little face lit up whenever her dad or Granny spoke to him, and when Rich popped round in the evenings after work to see his son, it lifted her heart. Not long ago she'd wondered if Luke would even know his father, but now he saw him every day. She even found herself looking forward to Rich's visits. Rich was polite and courteous, kind and attentive. He'd watch Luke so Holly could have a bath or cook dinner, and when Luke had been put to bed, by both of them, he would sit with her and her dad and they'd talk. So far they'd discussed more ideas for the vineyard, agreeing that some of them were good but discounting others, and Rich had made notes, taking them away with him to work them through. He said he knew some people who might be able to help, and that he'd contact them to see what they suggested. Holly was relieved to see the hope that sparked in her dad's eyes at Rich's words. She had also been working on the website, wanting it to be ready before she shared it with them both. They didn't involve Granny in their discussions, because they didn't want to worry her, so they talked after she'd retired for the night. Her grief made her tired, so she went to bed early, and rose later and later. Holly had worried that it could be depression, but when she'd tentatively broached the subject, Glenda had laughed it off and reassured Holly that she was simply old and tired and missing her husband. Sleep was healing, she'd said, and Holly had to agree with that. It was already Friday. Rich was coming around later, and her dad had suggested that they have a barbecue. Holly was looking forward to the evening more than she cared to admit to herself. Holly carried the tray of paper plates, napkins and cutlery outside to the long picnic table her father had brought out from one of the barns. They'd used it over the years for outdoor celebrations, and after a good wipe down with a damp cloth, it had been fit for use. It was set with glasses and bottles of wine and soft drinks. Following a lovely sunny day, the evening was mild, and Holly hadn't bothered with a cardigan over her black cotton shirt dress, which she had paired with white lace-up pumps. She'd washed her hair, and put on some new moisturiser that she'd picked up at the supermarket. It was meant to give her skin a light glow, and in the bathroom mirror it had seemed to do as it promised. With a slick of lip gloss and a coat of mascara, she felt presentable. Granted, her legs and arms were white, but she wasn't into fake tan and hadn't spent enough time outdoors to tan naturally since she'd had Luke. She was terrified he'd get too hot, or that his soft white skin would be exposed to harmful rays, so she always kept to the shade. Of course, Luke hadn't yet experienced a hot summer, and that was something she knew she'd worry about too. How would she manage when he got older and she couldn't protect him all the time? "What are you daydreaming about?" her dad asked as he passed her on his way to the old gas barbecue. He'd dragged it out of the barn earlier that day and scrubbed it until it shone. Holly could see how pleased he was with his efforts. He had bought the barbecue years ago for Holly's 21st birthday celebrations, but after the first few summers it hadn't had much use. Holly had thought that was a shame. Her dad loved cooking outdoors because he said it reminded him of his youth. "I was just thinking about Luke and how much I worry about him." "It's exactly the same for me, you know, Holly." He opened the lid of the barbecue and steam rose into the air. "It doesn't stop because your child becomes an adult with a child of her own." Holly joined him at the barbecue and slid her arm around his waist. "Do you still worry about me a lot then?" "Every moment of every day." "Oh, Dad." She squeezed him tight. "I love you." "I love you too." He kissed her head. "Now, what do you think about the food? Should I do the vegetable skewers first, before the meat?" "Well, Rich did say that Sam's a veggie, so I doubt she'll want meat juices over her vegetables." "Can't understand it myself." Her dad shook his head. "Why miss out on the nutrients?" "Dad, lots of people don't eat meat these days. I've even considered giving it up myself." "You need the iron, what with having a young baby." "That's a myth, Dad." She rolled her eyes, then laughed. "I can get iron from lots of other sources." "But you'd miss out on burgers and steak." She shook her head at him. "There are bean burgers and veggie sausages there too, Dad. Once they're cooked, you can put them to the side to keep warm. I'll go and grab the rolls and sauces." She headed back indoors, checking the baby monitor as she went. She could hear Luke's steady breathing and Granny's radio along the landing. She'd been worried that Luke would struggle to nap while Granny was playing her music. But it seemed to comfort him, the sounds of a busy household playing out as he lay in his cot. It was a good job, really, because she'd been thinking over their future and was finding herself increasingly drawn to the idea of moving home. She piled up the packets of rolls on another tray, then got the condiments from the fridge and added them too. She'd been trying not to think about the fact that Rich had asked if he could bring Sam and another woman called Nicole to the barbecue. He'd told her it was because with Nicole's experience in PR, she'd be good to speak to about the vineyard. Holly was grateful for any extra advice, and she knew her dad would be too. The thought of sharing the website with anyone other than Rich and her dad did make her feel a bit nervous. She had done plenty of research into website design and watched several YouTube videos, and she thought that what she'd done was good. But to an experienced eye it might appear amateurish. However, it was lovely to be here with her dad, who was clearly pleased to have company, and she was looking forward to seeing Rich again too. His text messages, phone calls and visits all made her stomach flutter, and she knew she'd miss him now if he wasn't around. He was a part of this world, part of Greenacres. She'd been able to temporarily put him from her mind in Exeter, but here it would have been much harder, because she saw him everywhere she looked. Her memories of their time together haunted the vineyard, the house and the village. "What do you think?" Granny swanned into the kitchen, dragging Holly from her thoughts. She was wearing a long, flowery skirt and pink blouse under a white linen jacket. She'd found a pair of pink court shoes to match, and her lipstick was the same shade. "Wow!" Holly clapped her hands. "You look fabulous, Granny." "Why, thank you." Granny pouted and twirled slowly. "Where are you going again?" "Only for a pub meal, but a girl has to make an effort." "What time are you being picked up?" Granny peered at her gold watch. "In 10 minutes." She patted her bobbed white hair. "I do love my hair now. It's so easy to wash and dry." "It looks lovely." "Is that a car?" Granny went to the window. "Oh, it's Rich." She turned to Holly and smiled. "How are you two getting along?" "We're getting to know each other again." "Very wise. Don't want to rush anything, do you?" "We're not. Nothing like that is going to happen, Granny. I just want him to be a father to Luke." Glenda cocked an eyebrow, then nodded slowly. "I'll believe you, Holly. But do you believe yourself?" "What?" Holly frowned, but her granny had walked to the door and was peering outside. "Holly, don't look now, but there are 2 women with Rich." "It's okay, Granny. He works with one of them, and the other is her friend. They've come for supper." Glenda turned back to her. "That's all right, then. Don't want him falling for another woman, do we?" "Well, I don't know about that. It's none of my business, really." Granny pursed her lips. "We'll see. Time will tell, I guess. And you're a sensible young woman, so I'm sure you'll make the right decision." Holly bit her lip, picked up the tray and took it out into the garden. She'd heard a lot over the years about how her mother wasn't sensible and how she could be a bit wild. But she thought most of it came down to her grandpa's opinion, something that her granny still repeated as if it was fact. The mother Holly had known was kind and sweet, loving and optimistic, and not the woman her grandparents had sometimes described to her. But perhaps that was a generational thing. Parents were bound to view their children as wild or reckless, while children were compelled to rebel against their parents, whatever their upbringing was like. She placed the tray on the table outside, then plastered on her best smile before going to greet Rich, Sam and Nicole. She would be a good hostess to Rich and his friends, and hopefully they would have a productive evening. She liked seeing her dad look so positive and relaxed, and if they could find a way to improve the financial future of the vineyard, then he might look that way more often. Rich forced his mouth to close as he walked towards Holly. She looked incredible in a silky black dress with her blonde hair shining, her skin glowing and her bright green eyes sparkling like rock pools in the summer sun. He had always known she was beautiful, but now she took his breath away. Being near her was like coming home, like finding the place he was meant to be and should have been all along. He'd been such an idiot for not appreciating this incredible woman when he'd had the chance. "Holly," he smiled at her, "I'd like you to meet Sam and Nicole." Holly smiled at them, but her eyes were watchful, wary even, as if she was nervous about something. He'd explained that he wanted to bring Sam and Nicole because he thought Nicole in particular could help with some ideas for the vineyard, but Holly's reaction suggested she might be anxious about involving other people. "Hello." The women shook hands, then Holly introduced Bruce, who showed them to the picnic table and asked them what they'd like to drink. "I'm such an idiot, Holly, I've left the drinks I brought in the car." Rich hurried across and opened the boot, lifting out a strong carrier bag and a bouquet of pale pink roses. He'd liked the red ones he'd seen better, but he'd thought that taking Holly red roses might be a bit much. He still wasn't sure if giving them to her was a good idea, but he hated the thought of leaving them in the car to wilt. "These are for you," he said when he returned to Holly's side. She looked at the flowers, then at him. "You didn't have to do that." "I wanted to." "Thank you." She took the bouquet, held it up to her face and sniffed. Her eyes closed and her lips parted slightly. The impact upon Rich was shocking and instant. Desire shot through his body, making his heart pound. It hadn't happened to him in a long time, and it took his breath away. He quickly composed himself, then cleared his throat. "I also brought these." He opened the bag and showed Holly some soft drinks and 2 boxes of chocolates. "Thanks, Rich." She took the bag from him. "I'll put the flowers in some water." She turned and walked towards the house, and Rich watched her go, unable to tear his eyes away. Holly arranged the roses in a vase, then set it on the windowsill. They were very pretty and they smelt so good. Her mother had loved roses and had grown them in the garden, training them to climb around the front door and up the trellis of the front gate. They were still there, but tangled and in need of pruning, something else that would need some attention at some point. Outside she could see her dad chatting to Rich and the 2 women. Sam was just as beautiful as Holly remembered, with her sleek, waist-length black hair and a supermodel physique. In a light blue playsuit with matching headband and knee-high brown boots, she reminded Holly of Wonder Woman. "I like her outfit," Granny said as she joined Holly at the sink. "Oh, don't sneak up on me like that." "I didn't sneak, dear. I'm just stealthy." "No, you're not," Holly laughed, even though she was still waiting for her heart to stop pounding. "I am, Holly. In fact, sometimes I'm so stealthy that I don't even know I'm there." Holly shook her head. Sometimes she couldn't tell if Granny was teasing, or if it was just her age. "Oh, that woman's got her arm round the other one's waist." Holly peered through the glass. "Yes, she has," she shrugged. "Perhaps they're close friends. Now she's got her chin on her shoulder." Holly nodded. "They must be very close. But, Granny, what is this? A running commentary on our guest's behaviour?" Glenda smiled knowingly. "Actually, Holly, I think they're lovers." "What?" Holly turned to her. "Why do you say that?" "I can tell. In this day and age, it's absolutely acceptable for women to love women and men to love men. It always should have been, you know. But when I was growing up, it was frowned on. I had friends who were secret lovers. So it's wonderful to see people free to love who their heart chooses." "I agree." Holly hugged her. "What was that for?" "Because you're amazing. Just when I think I know you, you manage to surprise me." Her granny chuckled. "Do I? How wonderful. Your grandpa wasn't so accepting of lesbians, of course, what with him being so traditional, but I've always said that the heart wants what it wants. Love is love. You know what? I'd love to go on one of those gay pride marches." "Really?" "Yes. I'll add it to my bucket list." "OK. We could get one of those gorgeous, colourful flags and drape it over Luke's pram. We'd have a grand old day." "You're so cool, Granny." "So are you, my darling." Granny cupped Holly's cheek, then planted a kiss there. "Now, I need to finish getting ready, so you go and be sociable." Holly nodded, then went back out into the garden, still smiling at the conversation they'd just had. "That was amazing, Bruce. Thank you." Nicole dabbed at her mouth with a napkin. "It really was." Sam set her cutlery down on her plate. "I won't need to eat for a week." "That's not going to happen," Rich laughed. "You eat like a horse." "I do not." Sam frowned at him, but her eyes were laughing. Holly looked from one to the other, admiring their easy friendship. "She does, you know, Holly." Nicole caught her attention. "My Sam is a greedy girl." She wrapped her arm around Sam's shoulder, then kissed her cheek. "Oh, you." Sam kissed Nicole full on the mouth. "Always teasing me and encouraging Rich to do the same. They're as bad as each other, Holly." Holly smiled and sipped her wine. So they were definitely together then. "I should check on Luke." She stood up and climbed over the bench. "OK if I come with you?" Rich asked. Holly nodded. "When you come back, I'd love to have a tour," Sam said. "Greenacres seems like an amazing place." "It is," Holly agreed. "We have some ideas about how we can develop the business, and I have something to show you all." Her stomach clenched at the thought of sharing her website, but it had to be done. "We'll wait for you to come back, then we can all go together." Bruce picked up a wine bottle. "Ladies, fancy another?" As her dad poured more wine, Holly and Rich went to the house. She'd left the back door open, and the baby monitor had been on the table between her and Rich. She'd checked on Luke regularly, but she could tell from the steady breathing over the monitor that he was still sleeping. Outside her room, she paused. "So, Sam and Nicole? They've been together about 2.5 years, apparently. You'd think it was 6 months with how lovey-dovey they are. They are very affectionate. They're good together." He held her gaze, and her stomach somersaulted. He was close enough to touch, close enough to hold, and her eyes kept flitting to his lips. She stepped closer, knowing she shouldn't, yet wanting to be held. Perhaps the wine and the good food had relaxed her too much, and she'd let her guard slip. But Rich had been so kind and attentive to her all evening, had included her in the conversation and filled her in whenever she'd come back from checking on Luke. He'd also checked on Luke himself, and Holly could feel some of the anxiety about being solely responsible for her child lifting. Whatever happened between her and Rich, She was starting to believe that he would be the father she wanted for her son. And that was why she shouldn't confuse things by letting her feelings for him grow. There was too much at stake here to allow desire to cloud her judgment. Holly had to stay rational and to focus on what was important: Luke and the future of Greenacres. When they returned to the yard, it was decided that Bruce would remain at the house in case Luke woke, while Holly and Rich would take Sam and Nicole on a tour of the vineyard. Holly had grabbed a cardigan from her bedroom, suspecting that she'd need it as the evening wore on. They began by showing the women the best views of Greenacres. The vineyard always looked particularly beautiful at twilight, the low sun washing the vines with a golden glow. Holly's grandpa used to tell her that the land was made of gold, and as a little girl she'd believed him. Now she knew he'd meant that the soil was rich and fertile, and that it was as valuable as gold. Not just because of the money it could make them, but because of how it produced such fine grapes, and in turn such delicious wines. Next they strolled back along the front of the yard, passing the garden area behind Greenacres, where Bruce had set up the barbecue. Then along to the winery building and the barn that was used to store machinery, barrels and bottles. The large stone winery had been extended and updated over the years, and now housed some high-tech equipment, very different from the machinery Holly's grandpa had started out with. Attached to the main building was another, smaller building, where the wine was stored. "This is a fantastic place, Holly," Sam said as they walked. "What's in the barn at the far side of the yard?" "That one isn't used for much at all," Holly said. "It's been more of a storage facility over the years than anything else. That's why I was thinking that we could clear it out and use it for events." "Oh, yes. What sort of events were you thinking?" Nicole asked as she gazed across the yard at the second barn. Holly took a deep breath, suddenly a bit nervous about sharing her ideas, in case the women thought she was being too ambitious. "Tell them, Holly," Rich said at her side, his hand resting gently on her elbow. "I thought we could have tours of the vineyard followed by wine tasting." "That's a great idea," Nicole smiled. "And we could also hold events, such as wedding receptions and barn dances." "Barn dances?" Nicole raised an eyebrow. "Tourists love things like that. In fact, I bet some of the locals would too." Holly looked at Rich and he smiled. He'd told her that Nicole knew her job, and that she would make some helpful suggestions, but it seemed that Holly's own ideas were good enough. "What's along that side road?" Sam asked, pointing at the old track overgrown with weeds and shrubbery. "That leads to 2 stone cottages. They were here when my grandpa bought the land, and he initially leased them to employees, but in more recent years they've been empty and neglected." "Can we have a look?" Sam asked. Holly nodded, then led the way across the yard and along the narrow road. "Watch out for the stinging nettles," she called. It was dark and quiet along the track because of the way the trees arched overhead, like a leafy canopy. On either side, the pale blue heads of thousands of bluebells released their sweet, heady fragrance into the air. Beneath the scent lay the richer aromas of earth and vegetation. It was the beautiful smell of Greenacres. They reached the end of the road and Rich opened the gate that led into an open field with the 2 stone cottages at the far end. Holly's heart sank. The buildings really did look very sorry for themselves, with broken window panes and missing roof tiles. But Sam gasped and hurried through the long grass towards them. "These are amazing!" She clapped her hands. "I was hoping you'd think so," Holly said. Her grandpa had seen the cottages as more of a burden than anything else, annoyed that they'd require maintenance and effort if he wanted to do anything with them. He preferred to focus on the vineyard itself and the big old house. Holly had never given it much thought before, assuming that he had known what was right for the business, but now she saw it through fresh eyes. If he hadn't been so stubborn and set in his ways, they could have done so much more here. It must also have been tough for her father, who had clearly seen the potential for diversification, but had been unable to take it forward because Grandpa had ruled with an iron fist and wouldn't allow him to make any changes. Her dad could easily have left the vineyard and taken Holly with him, but he had stayed and bitten his tongue. She knew that he'd done it for her, so that she would inherit the place. At least her granny trusted him to do the right thing. Since Grandpa had passed, Granny had assigned sole management of the vineyard to her son-in-law, and Holly knew it was a lot to deal with. She wanted to help him as much as she could. They're beautiful, Holly. There's so much potential here. My dad and I think we could renovate them and use them as holiday rentals. Holly gazed at the cottages. You'd need an architect and some builder's quotes to find out what's possible and to get the best prices. But you certainly could rent them out. For a lot of money in peak season. Nicole ran her hand over the stone facade of the nearer building, then tried the door. It was locked. Grandpa kept them locked even though they're in such a state, Holly explained. I can run back and get the keys if you want to go inside. No, it's fine. I can see through the window. Nicole peered through the glass. It's a bit weathered in there, where the elements have clearly got in. But with some work it could be lovely. And these views. She turned and gestured towards the land that spread out before the cottages, fields to the right and vines to the left, then beyond that the dark expanse of the sea. Holly also thought that we could do something off-peak, Rich said, his face etched with pride as he winked at her. She had a great idea about offering romantic couples getaways in late autumn and winter, and possibly writers' retreats for those needing somewhere to hide away while they race towards a deadline or plod through edits. Wonderful ideas. Your accountant will be pleased with them, Sam smiled. Are you still with Mr. What did you say his name was again, Rich? Mr. Seymour, Holly replied. Grandpa wouldn't dream of having anyone else do the accounts, but Dad and I agree that we have to be forward-thinking. We were going to speak to Rich about it this evening, actually. We'd like your firm to take over the accounts for Greenacres, with Rich being our contact, of course. She glanced at him, suddenly shy about making the request, but when he met her eyes he was grinning broadly. I'd be honoured, he said. We'd love to take on your accounts, Sam added, but Dad needs to speak to Mr. Seymour first to make it all official. We think he carried on doing the accounts out of loyalty to Grandpa, and Dad reckons he'll be glad to let them go. That all sounds fabulous, Sam clapped her hands together. Rich, you'll be a junior partner too before long, if you keep finding us more clients like this. Excitement fizzed inside Holly. Nicole and Sam thought she had some great ideas, and agreed that there was much more that could be done here. It would take hard work and money, but Holly knew enough about business to understand that investment was often required to see a profit, and she felt sure that they could find a way to make this work. After seeing the two women's enthusiasm firsthand, she also felt ready to show them the website. As they walked back to the big house, she listened as Sam and Nicole gave their professional suggestions about how to start the whole process, including obtaining the relevant permissions from the council. And Rich explained what he'd found out about the financial investment required to make the changes. The numbers made her stomach roll, and goosebumps covered her arms, but Rich squeezed her shoulder more than once to reassure her. There were things to discuss with Rich and her father, and now that she knew more about it, they would have to speak to Granny too. Holly hoped that the old lady wouldn't be adverse to making some changes, but she had a gut feeling that she wouldn't mind at all. She also had a feeling that Rich would be there every step of the way, supporting, advising, and helping as much as he could. And that thought warmed her heart. When they reached the house, Holly went inside to get the laptop. She stood in the kitchen for a moment, gazing out of the window at the vineyard. She had nursed a secret doubt for a long time, a doubt that she had much to offer the world. She'd run the vineyard shop after deciding not to go to university, and although she'd done a good job of it, making a pleasing profit, she'd wondered if she had anything else to contribute. Now, though, even though she was sad that Greenacres had reached a point of instability, she also felt invigorated. She had a good business head on her shoulders, and she possessed a certain creative flair, as well as enthusiasm and a solid work ethic. Along with her dad and Rich, she would strive to make Greenacres great again, and she was excited about what that meant for them all. Chapter 14. 4 weeks had passed, and spring had given way to summer. So much had changed already. Although Holly had found out that planning permission often took up to 8 weeks, and sometimes longer depending on what was required, Rich's father had been able to pull a few strings at the council. The plans for the use of the second barn and the stone cottages had been processed, and things were moving quickly. Bruce had been surprised at the amount of money required up front, but he admitted to Holly that it wouldn't be a problem, as he'd been saving for years. He also had some money put away that he'd inherited from his parents in Australia, grandparents Holly had never met, because they'd died before she was born, and that he'd been keeping for a rainy day. He told Holly that he'd be happy to invest in the vineyard, because essentially it was an investment for her and for Luke. So the ball was well and truly rolling. There were builders at the cottages and in the second barn, and the work was due to be completed by late July, when they'd be ready to hold a grand opening. The thought made Holly's stomach flip. Her dad had been keen to project manage everything, and Nicole, whom they'd employed to oversee the PR, had turned out to be extremely efficient and competent. As she had told Holly and Bruce, they had great wine, beautiful views, and the right attitude. All they needed was the right advertising, and for their reputation to grow. She'd already arranged for a few taster weekends at the cottages, for a variety of bloggers and journalists, who would of course be given the full Greenacres vineyard tour experience. Holly's website had won everyone's approval, and it was now live, with teasers about the cottages and the events that could be held at the barn already attracting attention. They'd even secured some bookings for the cottages in August and September, as well as some inquiries about renting them over the winter months. It had been agreed that Holly would run the shop and website, answer emails and take bookings, while her dad would continue to see to the running of the vineyard and the winery. Rich would do the vineyard's accounts, now that Mr. Seymour had been thanked for his long service and gently retired, and Nicole would head up the PR. Holly was excited about her new role, and about taking Greenacres forward, and although it was a lot to juggle alongside caring for Luke, it was work that she could do while being there for him. She knew that as he grew and started toddling it would be harder to manage, but there was a lovely nursery in Penhallow Sands, and Lucinda had already offered her childcare services. Holly knew that she would manage, just as other working mothers did, but she also knew how lucky she was to have a family around her supporting her. Every day after work, Rich came to visit Luke and to help however he could. He'd been a source of support in more ways than one, and Holly had to try hard not to allow herself to get too close to him. But it was so difficult. He really had changed, and was demonstrating it in every way possible, by being a wonderful father and a good friend. This evening he was babysitting, while Holly went out with Fran, for an actual night out. She'd changed 3 times already, feeling uncomfortable in the fitted summery dresses she'd tried on, still convinced that even though she'd given birth almost 5 months ago, her belly was still too soft and rounded. She'd settled instead on a pair of stretchy indigo skinny jeans with hidden tummy support and a sleeveless white tunic top that fell to mid-thigh. With a pair of low wedges, she felt comfortable but smart enough to hit the town. When she went downstairs just after 7, Rich was in the lounge with Glenda. The TV flickered with some chat show, but the volume was down, and Rich and her granny were both talking to Luke. Her son was lying on his playmat in front of the sofa where Granny sat, with Rich at his side. Rich's long denim-clad legs were stretched out in front of him, and he was tickling Luke's tummy, causing the baby to chuckle with glee. "Evening?" Holly stood in the doorway, feeling like an awkward teenager, and wishing she was spending the evening at home. Rich looked up and his mouth formed a perfect O. "Wow, Holly, you look fabulous." She bit her lip. "Seriously? It's only jeans and a tunic." "Your hair and makeup are divine, darling." Granny nodded in approval. "And you have such a lovely figure. Isn't that right, Rich?" She nudged him and he smiled. "Perfect." His cheeks flushed, but he kept his eyes on Holly. Holly went over to Luke and knelt next to him to give him a kiss. "Be good for Daddy and Granny, won't you?" She looked up. "Where's Dad? Don't tell me he's still working." "He's out at the cottages, I think, speaking to one of the carpenters." Holly smiled. Her dad was spending a lot of time out there, ensuring that everything was done properly. He was so enthusiastic about the developments, and it was wonderful to see. "I'd better go and say goodbye before I leave." "I'll tell him you've gone," Rich said. No need for you to traipse all the way out there. OK, you're probably right. I'd struggle in these wedges, even though the road has been evened out now. She stood up. I'll grab my bag and jacket and wait outside for Fran. Cup of tea, Glenda? Rich asked. I'd love one. Coming right up. He followed Holly out into the hallway, then went through to the kitchen, while Holly chose a lightweight blazer from the cupboard under the stairs and fetched her bag from where she'd hooked it over the banister. He was leaning against the worktop when she walked into the kitchen. You do look amazing, Holes. Be careful tonight, won't you? I'll be fine. I'm 31 now and a mother. There'll be no dancing on tables or around poles or anything. Gosh, I should hope not. Rich shook his head. Sorry, it's none of my business really, but I do worry about you. The concern in his warm brown eyes made her heart flutter. I'll be sensible. And I'll be with Fran anyway. You know she doesn't take any nonsense. Good old Fran, eh? She'll probably spend the evening trying to persuade me to adopt that puppy. Holly smiled as she thought about the grey lurcher with his rough coat and waggy tail. She'd been to Fran's a few times over recent weeks and was getting rather fond of him. But adopting him would be a big step, and she wasn't sure she was ready for it. She had so much going on at the moment. Surely a puppy would complicate everything further. Even if his training had progressed wonderfully under Fran's careful guidance, even if his soulful brown eyes did make Holly want to take him home. It would be good for Luke if you did adopt it. They'd probably be the best of friends. Perhaps. She opened her bag and checked that she had her purse, for the 10th time since she put it in there, then closed it again. Thanks for doing this, Rich. Doing what? Looking after Luke. He's my son. I want to be involved as much as I can be. I know. And I'm so glad that you do. I was worried. You thought I wouldn't want him. No. Well, I didn't know how you'd react. But you're a great dad. I wish. I wonder, if I could be more to you too. His eyes widened, and Holly watched as he rubbed his hands over his face. Sorry, I shouldn't have said that. I'm trying to be patient too. To what? He didn't reply, so she moved closer and touched his arm. Rich, what's wrong? He lowered his hands and met her gaze. I want to win your trust, Holly. I want to be someone you can rely on. She paused for a moment, then made a decision. Sliding her arms around his neck, she hugged him. He was tense at first, but as he relaxed and his strong arms enveloped her, warmth spread through her body, and her skin tingled all over. Holly, he murmured into her hair. The emotion that had risen into her throat was so powerful that she couldn't reply. Rich felt so good, and smelt so good. It was like coming home after a long holiday, and she held on tight, wanting the hug to go on and on. Everything was going so well right now. Luke had his dad, and Holly had Rich's friendship. If they took things further, how would she cope if it all went wrong? She needed some form of commitment from Rich if things were ever going to develop between them. But just at this moment she couldn't explain that. Although she knew it was wrong on some level to allow her pride to enter into the situation, it did. After the way Rich had behaved last year, the last thing Holly wanted to do was beg him for a sign of his feelings. She wanted him to make that decision himself, to show her of his own volition that he cared. She didn't want to be the one to tell him how he should do that. She wanted him to just know. Silly? Perhaps. Selfish? Perhaps. Risky? Probably. But if he didn't care about her enough to show her, it wouldn't work. Holly had been hurt so badly that she couldn't take the chance of loving Rich again if he didn't love her back. Truly, madly, deeply. Even then, she didn't know if she'd be able to take the risk. A horn beeping from outside dragged her from her thoughts, and she gently slid out of his arms. You have fun with Granny and Luke, and don't forget a cup of tea, or she'll never forgive you. You have fun too, Holes. His voice was husky, his eyes dark with something she recognised as desire. She touched his cheek, then turned and let herself out of the back door. As she crossed the yard to the gate, she filled her lungs with fresh air, trying to shake away the longing for Rich that had made her head spin. "What's up with you?" Fran asked when Holly got into the back of the taxi. "You look like you've seen a ghost." "In some ways, I guess I have," Holly replied as she fastened her seatbelt. She'd seen the ghost of who she once was, the ghost of the love she'd felt for Rich, and the ghost of who he used to be. But she'd also seen the ghost of a chance that they could be reunited, if Rich knew how to show her his feelings. She wished she knew what it would take for him to do that, and for her to love him with her whole heart again. The wine bar in the centre of Newquay was busy, which surprised Holly, because she'd expected it to be relatively empty on a Monday evening. It was one reason why she'd agreed to go out on the town, expecting it to be quieter than it would be at the weekend. However, it seemed that Monday was a popular evening for colleagues to head for after-work drinks, and for women to catch up with their friends. They found a table in the rear corner of the bar, where the dim lighting and dark leather seats created a cosy atmosphere. They were tucked out of the way, and Holly was grateful for that. She could see out into the wine bar, but hoped that no one would really notice her and Fran. They ordered 2 Manhattans, and when they arrived, Holly sipped hers, savouring the sweet, rich taste and the warmth as the alcohol spread through her system. It relaxed her almost instantly, helping to ease the tension she'd felt as they'd entered the bar. In fact, the tension she'd felt since she'd started getting ready to go out. "Well?" Fran peered at her over her glasses. "Well, what?" "How are things?" Holly took another sip of her drink. "What things?" Holly said playfully. "I'm desperate to know if I'm going to have my friend home for good, if you've made your final decision about staying here. No pressure, though." Fran widened her eyes, then leant closer to Holly, making her giggle. "No, I can see that. No pressure at all." Holly rolled her eyes playfully. "I'm wondering how I ever managed alone, to be honest. It's lovely being back with Granny and Dad. Luke is a very well-behaved baby, but even so it was lonely in Exeter. And having people around is very comforting. Besides which, everything is going so well with the plans, and I feel like I'm making a big difference. The shop looks much better with your new stock, and the business already feels renewed. It will take time to build the reputation we want, but I truly believe that this is the beginning of something great for Greenacres." Fran nodded. "I'm so happy for you all. And how are things going with Rich?" "Well, it is nice having him there. Luke absolutely adores him, and he's a natural as a father. It's funny, I never thought he would be, but you should see him with Luke now. They've bonded and it's lovely." "Taking Luke away from him would be difficult then." "It would." Holly watched as a young couple entered the wine bar, laughing together. They looked happy and carefree, as if nothing was going to spoil their night. Sometimes Holly wished her life was simpler. Then she took a look at Luke and realised that she wouldn't change him for the world. "Do you think you could do it? Leave, I mean." "I don't think so. At least not until everything is up and running. And even then, it would mean leaving everyone in the lurch, and to be frank, I want to stay. I'm already making plans for childcare for Luke. And I know Penhallow Sands has a great village school. There are more reasons to stay than to go." "But if you stay, what does that mean for you and Rich?" Holly met Fran's questioning blue eyes. "I have no idea. I'm trying to take it day by day with him at the moment, because thinking beyond tomorrow is difficult. I know I need to make some firm decisions, but it's also nice to live for now." "I agree with you there," Fran raised her glass, "to living for today." They clinked glasses, then drank. "Another?" Fran asked. "Why not?" Fran went to the bar, and Holly opened her bag and checked her mobile. No texts, and no missed calls. That was good. It meant everything was fine at home. Rich was probably putting Luke down for the night. Then when he came back downstairs, Granny would try to feed him a scone or 3, and no doubt they'd be drinking endless cups of tea. Fran returned with their drinks. "Think that barman is cute?" She pointed at a tall bartender who reminded Holly of a young Johnny Depp. His dark hair was artfully messy, and his muscular arms were heavily inked. One of the tattoos led up his neck and finished behind his left ear. He's hot in that brooding bad boy way, yes. That's what I thought. Why don't you ask for his number? Fran wrinkled her nose. What? Oh, can't be bothered. But you said he's hot. Yeah, but men, they're so demanding. Fran shook her head. I have animals to care for and work to do, especially with your orders for landscapes and pottery, she winked. I can't be sexting all the time, can I? Holly laughed. Sexting? Well, yeah, that's what some guys expect, and I haven't got time for that nonsense. What about enjoying someone's company and spending time together? You don't have to be sexting. One guy I dated recently wanted me to sext him every day. He even sent me some interesting photos of himself. What, like selfies? Kind of. Fran pulled her face. You mean naked ones? She sighed. Yeah. Were they sexy? No. He was good looking and had a fit body, but who wants to see what he called the mighty staff when they're eating their porridge? Holly's shoulders were shaking now. The mighty staff? Yeah, he had some sort of warrior fetish. Oh, Fran! Holly got a tissue from her bag and dabbed at her eyes. He was so funny! Fran cocked an eyebrow. It wasn't me. He just had a tendency to think rather highly of himself. In what way? The word mighty was deceiving. They sniggered then, and Holly waved a hand to indicate that Fran had to stop making her laugh. Enough! Excuse me, ladies. They looked up to find two men looking down at them. The one who'd spoken was tall and golden from his hair to his beard, to his dazzling smile. His companion was much shorter, with a completely shaved head and strikingly blue eyes above a shy smile. We couldn't help noticing that you two are alone, and wondered if you'd like some company. We're not alone. He frowned. Pardon? We're together. The very fact that there are two of us means that we're not alone, get it? Fran's tone was deadpan, her expression neutral as she stared up at the golden one. Oh, we only wanted to offer you a drink. His eyes flickered around, then he swigged from his bottle of beer. Behind him, his shorter friend stepped back as if he was uncomfortable. No need to be so spiky. Spiky? Fran tilted her head to one side. I was merely pointing out a fact. Look, Holly interrupted them, we're grateful for the offer, but we don't want company, or any more drinks, thank you. The tall man eyed her, and Holly held her breath. OK, so you don't want company, but how about if you give me your number, and we could meet up another time? He smiled then, but a vein throbbed in his temple, suggesting that he was far from happy at their rejection of his advances. I don't think so. Holly shook her head. Nope. Now bugger off. Fran stood up, pulling herself to her full height and crossing her arms over her chest. The bald man put a hand on his friend's arm and attempted to pull him away from the table. Get off me, Leighton, it's fine, I'm coming. The tall man drained his beer bottle, then set it on the table in front of Fran. You're a loss. He grinned at them before swaggering away. Fran sank back onto her seat, but didn't take her eyes off the two men. Shall we go? Holly asked, nervous about a repeat performance. Why? Fran finally turned to her. Well, we don't want any trouble. We won't have any. We just did. He's a knobhead, but his friend won't let him come back. I hope not. Fran nodded, and that's another reason why I can't be bothered. Macho men like that leave me cold. Me too. Who does he think he is, throwing his weight around like that? Holly shivered. The man's attitude had made her feel quite vulnerable, but also incensed, and she was glad she was with Fran and that they'd be leaving together. She'd dealt with idiots like that in the past, but now that she had Luke, she felt more exposed than ever before, because if anything happened to her, it would affect him too. There will always be arrogant dicks like that, Holly, but they can't stop us living life the way we want to. I know. It was a bit scary though, wasn't it? It's all bravado with men like that. I just hope the next woman he tries to woo with his charm has the strength to stand up to him. They fell silent as they finished their drinks. Do you want to go home now? Fran asked. Holly had watched the men leave, the one called Leighton clearly irritated by his friend's aggressive attempts at chatting them up. The wine bar was warm and cosy, the music a mixture of 80s and 90s hits, And the barman looked as though he could deal with the men, should they return. It was nice to be out with Fran, and Holly felt more like her old self again. No, let's stay for a bit longer. Are you sure? Yes. She checked her mobile. It's still early, and the taxi's not due for another hour and a half. Let's have another drink, shall we? Good plan. Holly picked up their glasses. Same again? Yes, please. As Holly walked to the bar, she told herself to relax. Rich was looking after Luke, her dad and Granny were around if he needed help, and she was out with her best friend for the first time in a long time. She could let her hair down and enjoy herself, so that was what she would do. The evening had also confirmed something else for her, and she wasn't certain if she was entirely happy about it. She wasn't interested in getting to know another man, whoever he was. In fact, the idea of being with anyone else turned her cold. Her heart belonged to one man only, and if she couldn't have him, she'd prefer to stay single. For Holly, it had always been Rich. Holly closed the back door, then carefully slipped off her shoes. She listened for voices or the sound of the TV, but the house was quiet. It was only just gone 10 o'clock, but Granny liked to go to bed quite early, and she suspected that after a full day, her dad would either be snoring in his chair or in bed. That left Rich and Luke. She headed for the lounge and peered through the semi-darkness, the only light the glow from the muted TV. Rich was lying on the sofa with the baby monitor on his chest. He was fast asleep. She crept into the room and took the monitor from his hands, then took the crocheted blanket off the back of the sofa and draped it over him. His lashes fluttered on his cheeks, and he smiled briefly, reminding her of Luke when he was dreaming. They were more alike than she'd realised. She loved Luke with every fibre of her being. His happiness, his welfare and his future were her main concern, and she believed they always would be. Before she'd given birth, she had no idea exactly how much she'd love her child. As he grew inside her, she felt protective of him and wondered what he'd be like and who he'd grow up to be. But she hadn't understood exactly how powerful the maternal instinct was. It had left her breathless when it had hit her full force after Luke's birth. The days and weeks she'd sat next to his crib in the hospital had been agony, even though he hadn't been half as poorly as some of the other premature babies. She'd have given her life for him right then and there if she'd had to. She knew that Rich loved their son too. It was a bond they shared and always would. But apart from that, was there something more between her and Rich? Luke would grow up and one day leave home. That thought hurt, but of course it would happen eventually. And then what? If she and Rich did try to make a go of things, would they find that it had been only for their son? Was that enough? She knew it wasn't. Rich would love Luke now no matter what. That was how it should be, and she'd do her utmost to ensure that they had a good relationship. But as for her and Rich, she didn't yet know. As tempting as it was risky to give her heart to him again, and she wasn't sure she could do it. She leant forward and pressed her lips to his forehead. It seemed that her feelings for him were still there, just below the surface, and it was possible that they could be revived. Or she could keep them hidden away, suppress them and get on with her life. It would take something very special indeed for her to believe that Rich loved her as much as she had loved him. And the only way they could ever be together again was if he could prove that he did. Chapter 15. Rich was exhausted with trying to keep all the balls he was juggling in the air, but he hoped it would be worth it. He was finding his position at the accountancy firm quite enjoyable, and Sam's suggestion that he could end up becoming a junior partner was quite exciting. He had discovered a hunger to get on since he'd returned to Penhallow Sands, and it was a good feeling. When he'd finished at the office, he got changed, then rushed back to work on his secret project. Although it was more in the role of an overseer, as he'd hired someone to help with that one. It was going well, and he hoped it was the right thing to do. It was part of his plan to do something nice for Holly, because he knew he needed to make a grand gesture. Later, he'd head up to the vineyard to help Holly with Luke. It was his favourite time of day, when he got to see his son and to help with his bath and bedtime routine. The smile on Luke's face when he arrived, and the recognition that was more and more obvious now lifted his heart. Who knew that a surprise baby could make such a difference in a life that had seemed otherwise confusing and even pointless? He'd once felt worthless, as if those around him would be better off without him. But since Holly's return to Penhallow Sands with Luke, he'd felt that he had a purpose. Now he had a responsibility to provide love and stability for his son, as well as for Holly, even if it was just as a friend and the father of her child. Things at the vineyard were progressing well. It would soon be ready for the next stage of development. It was another reason why he hoped that his secret project would be a good thing for Holly and for Luke. They might need that space from the hustle and bustle that opening the vineyard to the public could create. Holly had really blossomed since her return to Greenacres. She had more colour in her cheeks, and her face had lost that pinched look. Her eyes were no longer as wary. And although he still sensed that she was guarded at times, as if she was holding back from him in some way, he did feel that she was starting to trust him again. If only he could go back in time and give himself a good kick up the backside for being such an idiot. But unfortunately for him, he hadn't yet added Time Traveller to his CV. Holly shifted Luke onto her right hip, then opened the door and headed out into the yard. She'd heard a car approaching and wondered if it might be a delivery for the workman. "It's Auntie Fran!" She smiled at her son, and he giggled. He was becoming so reactive to speech, especially to familiar words and to changes in Holly's intonation. Fran climbed out of her blue Escort, and Holly's stomach dropped to her flip-flops at the expression on her friend's face. "God, Fran, what is it?" Fran pressed her lips together as she approached the gate that opened onto the yard. "I had a phone call this morning." She swallowed hard, clearly trying to maintain a hold on her emotions. "From my mum. Turns out Dad's not well, She blinked, then removed her glasses and rubbed at her eyes impatiently. "Come on in and have a coffee." I can't." "Why not?" "I have the pup in the car." "Well, bring him in too." "Are you sure?" "Of course I am." Fran opened the passenger door and the grey puppy leapt down, then trotted towards Holly. When she opened the gate, he jumped at her legs, so she rubbed his soft head, being careful to keep Luke out of his reach. Her son squealed with delight as the dog stretched up and sniffed his socks. "Come on, doggy, let's make a coffee for Fran." In the kitchen, Fran sat at the table and made the pup sit in front of her. His tail wagged hard on the floor, but he stayed where she'd put him. "His training's coming along well?" Holly nodded at the dog. "Yes, he's a good boy and a quick learner." "Right then, tell me what's happened." Holly carried the mugs to the table one by one, with Luke balanced on her hip, then sat opposite Fran. She could see that her friend had been crying, and no wonder. Even though Fran's parents had moved to Italy, she was still close to them, and she idolised her dad. "Mum rang about an hour ago, I think. It's all been a bit of a blur. Anyway, she said Dad was complaining about heartburn last night, but she put it down to overindulging on cannoli. But by the early hours he was in a lot of pain and nothing seemed to be helping. Then," she released a slow breath, "then he got out of bed and collapsed." "So is he in hospital?" Fran nodded. "What are you going to do?" "I have to go out there. I can catch a flight later today. I can't not go, just—" She bit her bottom lip and blinked hard. Holly reached across the table and squeezed her hand. "I understand. What can I do to help?" On her lap, Luke bounced up and down and slapped the tabletop with his chubby little hand. "I didn't know what to do about the animals, but I rang Shell and she said not to worry, she'll look after them, and Bella will give her a hand." "Can she manage that with running the shack?" "I know it'll be a stretch, but who else can I ask?" "I could always go over and stay at yours." Fran shook her head. "No, it's fine. You've got Luke and your granny to think of, plus everything that's going on here. Besides which, it takes ages to feed the animals and clear up after them, and I couldn't expect you to do that. Shell will sort it. She said she's got a new employee who'll help her with the shack, so she reassured me she'll be fine. What about this little chap? Fran looked down at the pup. He's doing so well with his training, but I'm worried about leaving him. He's such a sweetie, but he hates being without human company, which he would be when Shell has to leave for work. The others are older and more relaxed, but he's still at that needy stage. As if he knew they were discussing him, the pup emitted a low whine, then shuffled forward on his bottom and pawed at Holly's legs. She stroked his head, and he licked her palm. She didn't know if she'd regret this, but it seemed like the only answer. I'll take him. What? Leave him here. I can't ask you to do that, Holes. You've got your plate full. No arguing about it, Fran. He can stay with me. Thank you so much. Fran rubbed the pup's ears. Did you hear that? You're going to live with Holly and Luke. Live? Stay, I meant stay. Holly's going to foster you, for a while. The dog gazed up at Holly with his big brown eyes, and she knew that she'd made the right decision. He still doesn't have a name. I've been calling him Doggo and Pup, but he does need a name of his own. I'll have a think. Fran sipped her coffee. Holly, are you absolutely sure about this? The last thing I want to do is add to your workload. I'm sure. How could I resist those eyes? Now, can I do anything else to help? I'm hoping I'll only be gone for a few days. You know my dad, he's strong, he'll pull through. I'm certain he will. Just tell him to stay off the cannoli. Fran smiled. Bloody greedy pig. Bet he's piled on the weight with all that delicious Italian food. Holly waved Fran off, making her promise to call if she needed anything else, then returned to the house. All the time the pup was at her heels, trotting along like a scruffy little shadow. Luke had already taken to him, clapping his hands and laughing when he responded to his noises. Holly had a feeling they'd be great friends. For as long as the pup stayed, that was, which would be temporary, of course. He was going right back to Fran's when she got home. She wouldn't soften on that decision. Would she? Fran had left a harness and lead, a bed and a few toys, along with a bag of dried dog food. Holly knew nothing about feeding dogs, so she'd got Fran to write down instructions, along with when to let him out, how much to exercise him, and when to call the vet, although she hoped that last one wouldn't be necessary. She checked the time and was surprised to find it was gone 12. I guess now could be a good time for a walk. We could take Dad some sandwiches and get some fresh air in the process. She strapped Luke into his pram, packed a bag with sandwiches, a flask of coffee and a bottle for Luke, then called the dog to her to put his harness on. He wheeled around excitedly as she tried to slide it over his head, then grabbed the lead off her and raced around the kitchen table. Doggo, she sharpened her tone. That's naughty. She strode across the kitchen, but he ran the other way, so she turned and caught him by surprise as he made for the back door. Come here. She clipped the lead to his harness. Fran failed to tell me that you get overexcited when you hear the word walk. I'd better remember that one. He bounced up and down, scrabbling at her legs, and she sent out a silent thank you that he was a small dog. A heavier one would have hurt her. But his paws were light as they patted her thighs. Somehow she manoeuvred the pram out of the door along with the dog, then slid the strap of the bag over the pram handle. She already felt as though she needed to sit down. Goodness only knew how she'd feel after a walk with these two. She crossed the yard, holding the lead with one hand and pushing the pram with the other. It was a beautiful day, and the sun was high in the sky. The breeze was cool enough for her to keep her cardigan on, but not enough to chill her, and it ruffled her hair gently, making her feel relaxed and content. As she walked along the road towards the cottages, where her dad had said he'd be today, she breathed in the sweet floral aromas that rose to greet her. She had to stop a few times for the pup to water the flowers, but it was fine, as she wasn't in a rush. From up ahead she could hear the noise of a saw and carpenters calling to one another as they worked on the cottages. Soon there would be 2 gorgeous self-catering holiday rentals ready to start earning. As she emerged from the trees, she smiled at the sight that greeted her. The land around the cottages had been tidied up, and the gardens restored to their former glory, with new plants, neatly trimmed hedges, and freshly mown grass. The small paned windows shone in the sunlight, framed by newly painted shutters. There were workers on the roofs painting the chimneys, and some outside painting the exterior of the cottages. She could picture how they would look when the work had been completed, and it was exciting. With the beach a short car journey away, along with the pretty fishing village of Penhallow Sands, the rentals would hopefully prove popular, especially if Nicole's media contacts gave them some favourable coverage. Once the work was finished and the new furniture and furnishings Holly had ordered were installed, she would take photographs to post on the website. She felt so proud to be a part of this venture, and it had rekindled her interest in business and business law. It made her want to give something back to the world if she could, though she wasn't quite sure how to do that yet. As she neared the cottages, she looked around for her dad. She couldn't see him out the front, so she went to the first cottage and knocked on the door. It swung open to reveal a workman in baseball cap, jeans and T-shirt covered in sawdust. "Hi, Barry. I was wondering if my dad was around." Barry frowned, his bushy eyebrows meeting under the rim of his cap. "He was here earlier. Think he might be around the back, working on the summer houses. Do you want me to shout for him?" "No, it's fine. I'll go round myself." Holly pushed Luke's pram around the cottage and opened the side gate. She closed it behind her, checked that the garden was clear, then unclipped the dog's lead. It would do him good to have a run around and burn off some of the energy that had made him pull at his lead on the walk. Holly's arm was aching from trying to hold him back. Hopefully he'd get used to walking alongside the pram, or she'd end up with one arm longer than the other. "Hello," she called in the direction of the summer houses. They were so newly built that she could smell the timber and the sealant that had been used on the boards. She'd helped her dad pick out furniture, wanting to make the little houses perfect for their guests.
End of CD 5. CD 6.
She pushed down the brake on the pram and peered in at Luke. He'd drifted off in the fresh air, so she had a while before he'd want his next feed. "Hello? Dad?" The dog raced towards the nearer of the summer houses and disappeared through the open doors. Holly followed him, anxious to find her father. After hearing Fran's news, worry pierced her, and she experienced a slight uneasy fluttering under her ribcage. She hoped Bruce was all right. She didn't know how she'd cope if anything happened to him. "Bloody hell!" a shout came from the summer house, and her dad emerged looking red-faced and flustered. "Where did you come from?" he questioned the dog, as if expecting it to answer. "Hi, Dad. He's with me." "Holly?" her dad frowned. "Yes, it's me. Everything okay?" "Yes." His eyes flickered towards the summer house. "Fine. Everything's fine." His Adam's apple bobbed in his throat, and the blush in his cheeks deepened. Holly wasn't used to seeing her dad so ruffled. "Well, Bruce, I think we can safely say that you've checked out my toolkit." A female voice came from within the summer house, and was quickly followed by a tall, broad figure in scruffy jeans, checked shirt and cap. "And thanks for allowing me to check your hard wood. Floors, that is." Holly's mouth fell open as she looked from the woman to her dad, and the woman's eyes widened. "Holly, this is Janine." "We've met already," Holly replied. Janine was a senior carpenter, and had been at the vineyard for some time. "Yes, that's right," Janine nudged Bruce. "Of course." He rubbed a hand over his eyes. "Janine was, checking that the finish in the summer house is, satisfactory." "Right." Holly stared at them, not quite sure what she was feeling, although it was so awkward that she was worried she might start laughing. "I brought you lunch." She went to the pram and unhooked the bag, then removed the flask and sandwiches which she set down on a picnic table in the garden. "I'll leave you to it." "No, stay, Holly, please." "I don't want to disturb you and Janine." She knew she shouldn't laugh at her dad's embarrassment, but it was so sweet that he was blushing, and it was clear that there was something going on here. "You're not disturbing anything." "I should be going anyway. I need to get that order processed at the builder's yard." Janine kicked at a tuft of grass with her work boot, then flattened it down. "Okay, Bruce nodded. Speak later. Janine briefly touched his arm, then smiled at Holly. Bye, Holly. Holly nodded, and the woman walked towards the back door of the cottage. The pup raced to the picnic table and jumped up, setting his front paws on the bench and sniffing the air. He can smell the sandwiches. Bruce rubbed the animal's ears. Fran dropped him off earlier. She's had to go to Italy to see her dad. He collapsed this morning. That's awful. Bruce shook his head. Poor Christopher. Hope he'll be okay. Yes, I really hope so. They sat opposite each other and ate the lunch Holly had prepared, washing it down with cups of coffee from the flask. Holly bit back her questions about Janine, believing that her dad would tell her when he was ready, if there was anything to tell, that was. From inside the cottages, the sounds of sawing and drilling drifted into the air, punctuating the silence that hovered between them. So how long's this little fellow staying? I don't know yet. Does he have a name? Holly shook her head. I said I'd try and think of one. Risky that. Why? If you name him, you might want to keep him. No, I won't. She didn't sound convinced, even to her own ears. You'll get attached, Holes. I'll try not to. She drained her coffee. Are you okay, Angel? He asked, his eyes wary as they roamed her face. I'm fine. Are you? He nodded. What you saw then? I mean, what you heard, rather. It's none of my business, Dad. Well, it is kind of, because you live here and I'm your dad and, well, we should be honest with each other. I hadn't said anything before now because I wasn't sure there was anything to say. Are you seeing Janine? Holly gazed at his familiar features, his broad shoulders and his kind eyes. He'd been alone a long time and deserved to be happy. It was just the shock of hearing a woman joke about sexual activity with him that had thrown Holly, making her want to giggle. Her dad had every right to a sex life, even if it was something she'd prefer not to think about. I don't know that we're seeing each other. I mean, I like her, and I've been enjoying her company while she's been working here. She's sweet, funny, and self-deprecating, and I feel comfortable with her. I'm not really an old man yet. Well, when I was your age, 55 seemed ancient, but I don't feel any different than I did when I was 35. I do creak a bit more in the mornings when I get out of bed, but that's to be expected. You have every right to be happy, Dad. I'm pleased for you, delighted in fact, though she'd better treat you right or she'll have me to deal with. She scowled at the thought. Thank you. He screwed up the foil that the sandwiches had been wrapped in. We haven't even been on what could be classed as a date yet. We've met for coffee, and we went for a drink one evening, but the lads were there too. But she makes me laugh, and that's something not to be sniffed at. I feel relaxed with her, and that I can be myself. That's good, Dad, Holly smiled, reaching out and covering his hand with hers. I want you to be happy. I was simply a bit surprised to hear what I did when I arrived. I hope it didn't seem as though I was being judgmental. No, of course not. Bruce lowered his eyes and chuckled as the flush returned to his cheeks. Nothing happened, I promise. She's just a bit of a joker. It was good that Janine was able to make Bruce smile, and that he felt at ease with her. Life could be lonely, and finding someone who understood you was important. Holly couldn't imagine finding another man she would care about the way she'd cared about Rich. She couldn't, now she really thought about it, visualise herself with anyone else. Whenever she thought about the future, which she'd been trying not to do too much because it meant making some big decisions, the only man she could picture with her and Luke was Rich. A murmur came from the pram, and before Holly could get up, the dog had hurried over and started circling the wheels, whimpering. Seems like you've got yourself a guard dog. Bruce stood up and went to the pram, then lifted Luke out. The pup stopped making a noise and followed him back to the table. Bruce sat down with Luke in his arms. He's a good dog. Holly patted the bench next to her, and the pup jumped up and settled down, watching as Luke babbled at his granddad. You know, there's a story, I think it's a Welsh legend, about a dog that gave its life for a baby. Holly nodded. Yes, of course. It had a terribly sad ending, though. It did, but looking at that scruffy grey boy, I think the name would suit him. You mean Gellert? They both gazed at the dog, and he tilted his head as he gazed back. "Do you like that name?" Holly asked him. Gellert answered with a bark. Chapter 16. "Who's this little chap?" Rich asked as he received a very enthusiastic greeting from Gellert at the back door. Holly finished wiping the kitchen table. "That is Gellert." "Hello, Gellert." He crouched down and rubbed the pup's chin. "I didn't know you were getting a dog." Holly shook her head. "Neither did I, but Fran needed someone to look after him. She had to leave suddenly yesterday after her father was taken ill." She rinsed the cloth in the sink, squeezed the water from it, then washed her hands. As she dried them, she stood for a moment gazing out at the yard. It was early Saturday morning, and sunshine warmed the kitchen, making her feel relaxed and a bit sleepy. She was still in her pyjamas, with her fleecy dressing gown over the top. She'd had a restless night, getting up to Gellert as he settled into his new surroundings. In the end, she'd taken his bed upstairs and set it on the landing outside her door, which she'd left open a crack, and the pup had finally settled. "Sorry I couldn't get here last night. I was waiting for a delivery at the office, and by the time it came and I'd sorted the paperwork, it was late." "It's okay," Holly smiled at him. "I got your text." "I know, but I hated not being here. I like saying goodnight to Luke properly." Rich stood up and approached the reclining high chair, where Luke was chewing on a teething ring, held in safely with a 5-point harness designed for smaller babies. Gellert followed him closely, watching what he was doing. "Good morning, Luke." The baby squealed with delight as his dad lifted him from the chair and blew raspberries on his cheeks. "Do you fancy doing something today?" Rich asked Holly as he bounced his son on his hip. "Like what?" "We could take a walk in the village and perhaps grab some lunch." Holly glanced down at herself. "I need to dress first." "That's fine." Rich handed Luke the teething ring from the tray of the high chair. "I'll watch Luke while you take a nice bath. There's no hurry." "That would be wonderful. Are you sure?" "Of course." An hour later, Holly had enjoyed a soak in the tub, dressed and drunk a strong coffee, then got Luke's things together. As Rich strapped the baby into his pram, she located her purse and mobile and popped them into the changing bag. "Right, I think I've got everything." "You going out, dears?" Granny padded into the kitchen in her nightgown and slippers. Her hair was sticking out at the side, and she had a crease on one cheek from her pillow. "Yes, we're going for a walk." Holly looked at Rich, and he nodded. "Would you like to come too, Granny?" "Oh no, sweetheart, thank you. I've a list of jobs to do today." "Like what?" Holly frowned. Her granny shouldn't be worrying about getting things done. She should be relaxing or going out and enjoying the sunshine. Granny waved a hand. "I promised your dad I'd help him look for some furniture for the barn on the internet. And I need to catch up on my TV." "Oh, all right then." "To be honest, Holly, I'm exhausted. I've been keeping so busy that I really could do with a day at home resting." She carried the mug of coffee she'd made to the table and sat down. "Of course. Well, I've got my mobile, so ring if you need me." "Is your father out already?" Granny asked. "Yes, he went out to the winery first thing. He'll probably be back soon for a drink." Holly turned to Rich. "Shall we go?" "Sure." As he pushed the pram out of the door, there was a whine from under the table, and Holly looked down to see Gellert gazing at her, his soft brown eyes unblinking. "What is it?" He crept closer to her and held up a paw, and realization hit her. "You want to go for a walk too?" He jumped up and started circling on the kitchen tiles, his tail wagging furiously and his mouth open as if he were smiling. Holly grabbed his lead and harness off the hook by the door and knelt down. "Come on then, boy. I guess this is how we roll while you're staying with us." Rich pulled into the large car park at the top of the hill that led down into the village. They got Luke and Gellert out of the car, and the dog skipped about with excitement. "I can't believe I didn't think about bringing him," Holly said as they strolled down the hill. "Family pets, eh?" Rich laughed. "He seems to adore you and Luke. When he went for a bath, he didn't take his eyes off me, as though he thought I might steal Luke away." "It's good that he's protective." "Definitely. I feel better knowing you have an extra bodyguard." "An extra bodyguard?" Well, you know, when I'm with you, I can look out for you and Luke. But when I'm not there, Gellert can do it. I never thought of you as a bodyguard type, Rich. Holly stared straight ahead as they walked, her eyes fixed on the horizon. Rich wished she would look at him, but had a feeling she was deliberately avoiding doing so. There's a lot you don't know about me, and probably vice versa. Perhaps we need to get to know each other all over again. He held his breath. Seeing as how we have a child together, that does sound sensible. Sensible? His heart sank. He couldn't tell in what capacity Holly wanted to know him, and he was afraid to ask, in case he scared her away. In light of his other, grander planned gesture, things could go very wrong if he hoped for too much. The last thing he wanted was to drive her from Greenacres and to lose her and Luke. He needed to tread carefully. They walked the rest of the way in silence, occasionally pausing for the dog to sniff at lampposts and grass, and Rich focused on the gentle warmth of the late May sunshine on his face, the sounds his son made in the pram, and the way the sea glittered, as if filled with millions of tiny diamonds. The air was sweet and fresh, laced with a salty tang. The gulls cawed overhead, the beating of their wings hypnotic and regular as a heartbeat, and out at sea a ship's horn sounded. He'd been here hundreds of times before, experienced these things hundreds of times, and yet today they were different. It was as if he was experiencing them all for the first time. And in a way he was. This was the first time he'd come into the village with Holly and his son. The first time he'd felt the lightening of the burden he'd carried for so long. Holly's presence at his side, the fragrance of her perfume as she accidentally brushed against him, and the ready smile of their baby son, all made everything feel so much better. It was as though his eyes were open now, as though he was fully awake, whereas before he'd been sleepwalking through life, waiting for something to wake him up, or to make him pay for what had happened to Dean. He'd felt to blame for so long for taking his brother out into the water like that, and for failing to help him when he'd struggled. The worst thing that could have happened to Rich after losing Dean had actually happened, and it had been his own fault. He had lost Holly. But he had survived and sought help. And being with Holly now was different because he was different. It had taken his time away, then returning to Penhallow Sands, to bring him to this point, as if he'd almost come full circle in his journey. Being away from Holly had enabled him to clear his mind and to accept that he did have deep feelings for her. His guilt and grief had clouded his mind for a long time. But as they eased, helped by Holly's gentle presence and Luke's joyous one, Rich actually felt that he could see a future. Life could be good. He just needed to release himself from the final threads of his guilt, and he suspected that Holly was the one person who could help him to do that. As they neared the street where Shell's shack was located, the aromas of coffee and freshly baked cakes drifted towards them, making Rich's stomach grumble. The wind chimes outside the cafe tinkled in the breeze, making him think of children's laughter, of the happy, carefree times before his life had changed, before he'd lost his way, forgotten who he was and who he wanted to be, and sunk into a darkness that he hadn't thought he'd emerge from. It had been Holly who had kept him going then, her sweetness and her strength that had buoyed him up every time he thought he'd disappear completely. And how had he thanked her? By breaking her heart. It was her complete forgiveness that he needed to release those final threads. She'd told him more than once that she did accept his apology, but as his mother had always said, actions spoke louder than words, and Rich knew he needed to see it in Holly's eyes, to feel it in her embrace. "Do you want to buy some food and we can have a picnic on the beach?" he asked. Holly looked so pretty this morning, with her bobbed blonde hair pushed behind her ears, and the blue of her eyes brought out by the colours of her nautical striped hoodie. In faded jeans and white lace pumps, she was dressed simply, but it was her style. It was perfect. "As long as I can have cake as well as sandwiches," she flashed him a smile. "You can have 2 cakes if you want." They went into the cafe and ordered food to go, then took their purchases down to the seafront. Rich pushed the pram down the ramp to the sand, and they made their way automatically towards the rocks near the craggy cliffs that hugged the bay to the right. When they reached a sheltered spot that was out of the breeze and offered shade from the sun, Rich set the brake on the pram, and Holly crouched down and pulled out a picnic blanket from the basket underneath the car seat. "You've come prepared. I'm a mum now. I have to carry everything but the kitchen sink." Rich helped her to spread the blanket out over the sand, then placed rocks at the corners to hold it in place. He went back to the pram to get Luke out, but the baby was asleep, so he pulled up the hood and tucked the soft blanket around his body. Even though it was sunny, the wind down on the beach was cool, and he didn't want Luke getting chilled while he slept. Holly had settled Gellert on the blanket, and Rich watched as she gave him a drink of water from a small metal bowl, then produced a chew stick that she handed to the dog in exchange for a high five. "It seems you did think of everything." His voice was filled with admiration, and Holly's cheeks flushed. "I just grabbed them before we left. It'll keep him quiet for a bit. Fran said the chews help keep his teeth clean." Holly handed Rich the bag from Shell's shack, and he spread the contents out in front of them, ensuring that the coffee cups stayed upright by planting them firmly in the sand. Then he unwrapped the toasted cheese paninis they'd ordered, along with the slices of chocolate cake and Bakewell tart. "Here's to a happy, healthy and successful summer." He held his cup up, and Holly gently tapped hers against it. "I hope it is." She bit her lip, then raised her eyes to meet his. "Dad has put so much into the vineyard. If it goes wrong—" "Hey," he touched her hand. "It won't go wrong. And don't forget the effort and hard work you've put in too. You've been a major part of the changes. You came up with most of the ideas, and your website is fantastic. Nicole is very positive about promoting Greenacres' grand reopening, as am I. It will be a great success." Holly nodded. "Thanks, Rich. I needed to hear that." They ate their paninis gazing out across the beach. Families strolled on the sand and settled in spots near the sea so their children could build sandcastles and paddle in the water. It was warm enough that some would probably venture in for a swim, but the more sensible would wait for a few more weeks. Dogs barked excitedly as they raced around, making the most of their freedom, as come mid-June they'd be allowed on the beach only on leads until October arrived. "Are you having cake or tart?" Holly asked when they'd finished their paninis. "I thought you wanted both." She smiled. "I'm fuller than I thought I'd be. I'll start with cake and see if I have any room left." The chocolate cake was shiny, with frosting that cracked as Holly pushed her plastic fork into it, and Rich tried not to smile as he watched her enjoying it. "That was amazing." She licked her fork, then put it in the cardboard box with her napkin. Rich laughed. "What?" "You have some on your cheek." "Where?" She rubbed the wrong side. "Let me." He used his napkin to wipe away the chocolate frosting, and when he pulled his hand away, he found Holly's eyes glued to his face, her pupils large and dark. "Rich, do you ever wonder what things might have been like if I hadn't messed up so royally?" "Yes." "I wish with all my heart that I could change the past." It would be so easy to dwell on that, but it wouldn't get them anywhere, and Rich knew too well the cost of dwelling on what might have been. "Sadly, all I can do is be a better man from here on, and do my best to make the future as good as it can be." "I know. I think about it sometimes." She cleared her throat. "A lot, actually. Being home and around you so much has made it difficult not to. I think about what it could have been like too, but I try not to beat myself up for making a mess of things." "You do?" He nodded. "We had some good times, didn't we?" "The best times of my life. Until Luke arrived, that is." She glanced at the pram as if to emphasize her point. "He's the best thing I've ever done." "I can't imagine life without him either," Rich smiled. "Hey, remember that night when we had a barbecue in the dunes and couldn't find marshmallows anywhere, so Josh tried to use chocolate tea cakes instead?" "Yes, I do. The chocolate melted completely, leaving the inside of the cakes all sticky, and then the jam burnt. It stank." It was all done to impress Fran, you know. Even then she had plenty of admirers. I'm surprised she's never met anyone she could fall for. She's picky. And she's also too busy, I think, with everything else. Mind you, she'll probably fall in love with an Italian hunk and come home married. I guess anything's possible with Fran, Rich said, and they laughed in agreement. He paused, then said more quietly, "Sometimes I think anything is possible if you want it enough." Holly pushed her hair behind her ears, then met his eyes. "I think you're right." Holly and Rich walked along the seafront, making their way towards the bakery. As they entered the small shop, the delicious aromas of cakes, bread and pastries greeted them. It was a mouth-watering and familiar scent, taking Holly back through the years to all the times she'd come in here after they'd been swimming or spent a day at the beach, when they'd wolfed down pies, pasties, cakes and freshly baked crusty rolls. Rich's parents had run the bakery for as long as Holly had known them, and being there again sent a rush of emotions hurtling through her. After Rich's mother had ranted at her last year, Holly had thought she'd lost Lucinda and Rex as well as Rich, and it had been terribly painful. She'd lost her own mum, and Lucinda had stepped into the breach and helped her to cope, so when the older woman had told her she wasn't good enough for her son, it had torn her apart inside. Holly wanted to rebuild their relationship, but she knew it was going to take time. Lucinda had made it clear that she was sorry for what she'd done, and Holly didn't want her to suffer for a moment of anger. People said things in the heat of the moment that they didn't mean and lived to regret them. Could the same be said of their actions too? Rich had done things that he said he regretted, and although it had been a build-up of emotions over a period of time, it had all come to a head that day last year. Sometimes things needed to boil over so they could be seen for what they were, and people could move on. Things were moving on here, and Holly wanted to play her part. Time passed so quickly, and life could change in an instant. When she'd walked away from Penhallow Sands, she tried to put her home, her family, Rich and his family, from her mind. But they'd always been there, simmering below the surface, reminders of a life she had once treasured. "Hello, my darlings," Lucinda smiled from behind the counter. A hairnet was visible underneath her red baseball cap, and her round cheeks were almost the same shade as the cap. She waved a hand in front of her face. "It's so warm in here today." She came around the counter and headed straight for the pram. "I swear he's growing bigger every day." Holly nodded. "I can't keep up with how quickly he changes." "He'll be 34 before you can look round." Lucinda shook her head. "Like my baby." She nudged Rich and he grimaced. "Mum." "What?" She laughed. "You'll always be my little boy." Rich blushed at his mother's teasing. "Can I get you anything?" she asked. "Something to eat or a drink?" "I'm fine, thanks," Rich replied. "What about you, Holly?" "No, thank you. We haven't long had lunch, and I'm stuffed." "Actually, Mum, we thought we'd head up to the cottage and have a cuppa with you and Dad when you get home." Lucinda's eyes lit up. "That would be lovely." She turned to the counter. "Rex, come out here." Rex came through the doorway from the kitchen. "Hello, you two. You four, I mean." Holly was holding Gellert on a tight leash, but his tail wagged enthusiastically. "Who's this little chap?" Rex asked. "I meant to ask that myself, but I was so pleased to see them all." Lucinda crouched down and rubbed the dog's head. "He's a cutie, isn't he?" "This is Gellert. He's Fran's dog, but she had to go and see her father, so I'm looking after him," Holly explained. "I heard via the village grapevine that her father isn't well. Hope he recovers, love him." A pang of concern filled Holly's chest as she thought of her friend. Part of her wished she could have gone to Italy with Fran to support her, but she also knew that her friend was fiercely independent and would probably have refused to allow her to tag along, even if she hadn't got a young baby in the vineyard shop and website to run. "Right. We'll see you at home then." Rich opened the door and Holly walked through it with Gellert, while Rich pushed the pram out. "See you soon," Lucinda waved at them, and as they walked away, Holly heard her say, "Rex, let's close early today. I want to spend some time with Holly and our grandson." It warmed her right through, deepening her sense of being home, right where she should have been all along. Everything was going to be all right again. Holly was sitting on a patio chair in Lucinda and Rex's back garden, listening to Lucinda reminisce about Rich's childhood while she cuddled her grandson. She'd wrapped him in a shawl she'd crocheted, and he was sucking at his bottle and gazing up at her. Rex had decided to do some puppy training with Gellert on the lawn. The dog was playing along, but seemed far more interested in the treats Rex was offering him than in actually getting things right. The evening was mild, and they'd been outside for hours, sitting out there to eat their supper of Rex's homemade carrot and coriander soup, accompanied by crusty granary rolls from the bakery. It had been followed by lemon tart with a short crust base so light it melted in the mouth, and a dollop of Cornish clotted cream. After their picnic as well, Holly felt as if she might pop. "My Richard was a boy and a half," Lucinda chuckled. "He came into the room one time when Rex was watching a nature documentary and asked him, 'Why has that octopus got so many testicles?' It sent us into fits of giggles." "Of course I meant tentacles," Rich said from Holly's side, "but I was only about 5. "Ah, yes, so you were," Lucinda nodded. "And there was that time when he was even younger and we'd taken him to the fair. We were waiting in line to go on the baby rides, and I was handing him popcorn one bit at a time. There were people in front of us and behind us, and lots of little children eager to get on the ride. All of a sudden Rich shouted out, 'Can I have some more cock porn, Mummy?' I swear I was so embarrassed I thought I'd faint." Holly laughed, holding her sides as tears rolled down her face. "That is so funny, Rich. What a rude thing to say." "It wasn't my fault. What was I, about 2 or 3? Rich was smiling too, clearly enjoying seeing his mum so relaxed. "Would you like some more wine, Holly?" Lucinda pointed at the bottle on the table. Holly glanced at Rich. He hadn't touched a drop as he was driving her and Luke home, but Holly had enjoyed a glass with dinner. "Have another one, Holes, it's fine." Rich picked up the bottle. "Go on then, just one more." "I guess we have plenty of funny times ahead to enjoy with Luke, don't we?" Holly said. Rich nodded. "He'll bring you so much happiness. That's the thing about parenthood." Lucinda gazed down at Luke, her expression softening as he gripped her thumb in his little fist. "Your children bring you worry. They bring you a vulnerability that you never knew existed. But they bring you so much joy, and so much love." Holly's throat tightened. She knew what Lucinda had been through, and wished she could take that pain away. She bit the inside of her cheek to try to stop herself getting emotional. A gentle touch on her shoulder made her turn to meet Rich's reassuring gaze. He knew what she was thinking. Of course he did. She reached out and took his hand, lacing her fingers between his. There was so much in life to fear, so much to worry about, and so much that could go wrong, and yet there was so much to enjoy and to treasure. Moments like this, for example. Chapter 17. "They're perfect, Dad. We're all ready to go." Holly stepped into her father's embrace outside the stone cottages. Another 2 weeks had passed, and progress had been amazing. "I'm really pleased." Her dad released her, then nodded towards the cottages. "I wish your grandpa could see them." "I mean, I know they needed some work to renovate them, but it wasn't as big a job as Grandpa would have had me believe. The way he described it, we'd need to knock them down and start again." "It's probably a good job that he's not here to see them then." Holly tucked her arm into Bruce's. He hated to be wrong about anything. "True." "This is it then." She took a deep breath. "The new beginning for Greenacres." Her dad's eyes widened. "I'm quite nervous." "It's going to be fine." "Are you sure about giving notice on your place in Exeter?" "Positive. I've given it a lot of thought, and I don't want to go back there. Except to collect my things, that is. And I have 3 months to do that anyway. I brought everything I needed with me, and none of the furnishings are mine, except for the cot. And seeing as how I have one here, I can donate it to a charity shop or see if the landlord wants it left at the flat." "I wouldn't have tried to change your mind if you'd wanted to go back, Halls. It's entirely your decision. But the fact that you've decided to come home for good makes me so happy. Granny is delighted too. It will be wonderful to have you around, and to be able to see Luke all the time." Holly leant her head on his shoulder. She had thought carefully about what to do, but over the past 2 weeks her decision had been made for her. The shop had started to get busier, with orders coming in for wine and for Fran's paintings and pottery, as well as lots of emails requesting more information about the cottages and events that could be held at the barn. The website was proving to be particularly popular and getting plenty of hits every day. Holly had suggested the idea of setting up a blog to run alongside it, where they could tell people about their winemaking processes, and also host guest bloggers who could write about their lives in Penhallow Sands. She looked up at her dad. "I don't want to miss the grand opening, or to be away from you and Granny again. Plus, I want Luke to grow up here like I did." "What about Rich?" he asked cautiously. "Does he feature in the equation?" He scanned her face. He wanted the best for her, she knew that, and whatever that was would be fine with him. Holly knew she could have decided to live on the moon and marry an alien, and as long as she was happy, her dad would have supported her. "I'm not sure yet. I have some very confusing feelings. It's even more complicated because of Luke." "Of course it is. You must take your time. No sense in rushing anything. Are you happy to continue running the shop and the website?" "Definitely. I love what I'm doing, and there's potential for so much more. I really think the blog is a good idea. People love to find out more about how our wine is made, and it will hopefully encourage them to visit and take one of our wine-tasting vineyard tours. There's always work here for you, Holly. But what about Luke?" "Lucinda has offered to help with childcare, and there are several options in the village too when I'm ready to leave him. I might even return to college eventually, possibly night school, and get some qualifications. I was thinking that I could do a degree in business law, like I wanted to do all those years ago, or perhaps I'll do something involving website design. There are so many possibilities, but whatever I do decide will be of benefit to Greenacres. When you were growing up, I didn't think you'd stay around, but after your mum died, I thought your dreams had changed and I worried about you. I've always wanted the best for you, Holly." "I know. I did have different dreams before we lost Mum, and although I brushed those dreams under the carpet for a while because I couldn't face the idea of leaving, I never completely forgot them. Back then I thought I'd need to go away to realise my ambitions, but now I know that's not the case at all. Greenacres and Penhallow Sands have everything I need to be fulfilled. I just needed to see that through different eyes, and to be given a new challenge. I want to stay and build something great here, something that we can leave as a legacy for Luke, and even for his children." Her dad smiled at her, his eyes full of approval. "Holly, your mum would be so proud." "I hope so." "No one will ever replace her in my heart. You know that, don't you?" He dropped his gaze to his boots, and Holly knew he was thinking about Janine. It was his way of letting her know that if things did become more serious there, he'd always remember her mum. "I do. But you also have a life to live, and Mum would want you to live it as fully as possible." "She would," he nodded. "I still feel guilty at times, though." "What on earth for?" "Well, I loved your mum, and I thought we'd be together for the rest of our lives. I feel guilty because it's like I'm betraying her." "Oh, Dad, you're not betraying her. She's been gone a long time, and you've been alone since she died. I know how much you loved her, and she did too. But happiness doesn't always present itself to us, so when it does, you have to grab it and hold it tight." As they walked back to the big house, arm in arm, with Gellert trotting along next to her, Holly thought about what she'd said to her dad. Happiness was hard to find, as was finding someone to connect with. If it happened, it was precious. Despite everything she had gone through with Rich, she did feel connected to him, even more so now that they had a child together. She'd left Luke at the big house with her grandmother. He had been sleeping, so she'd given Granny instructions to ring her immediately if he woke, and she'd hurry back. She knew the old lady could cope with Luke, and that she loved caring for him, but she didn't want to take anything for granted, especially as Granny tired easily and Luke was getting quite heavy. The sea air was doing wonders for his appetite. When they reached the yard, she was surprised to see Rich's car there. "I hope everything's all right," she said as she quickened her pace. "Rich should be in work on a Friday morning." Her dad placed a hand on her arm to stop her. "Holly, I want you to know that whatever you decide to do is fine." "What do you mean?" He sighed, then took hold of her shoulders. "Look, I've known about what Rich has been planning, and I didn't like not telling you, but he asked me to keep it secret. And I hope you'll forgive me for it." "Forgive you? For what? What's going on?" Her chest had tightened and her heart was thrumming. "It's nothing horrid, I promise. Rich has done something to try to make up for last year. Please give him a chance and listen to what he has to say. Lord knows I wanted to have words with him back then, and a few times before that when I saw how you'd been hurt by his behaviour. But I'm fairly certain that things have changed now. He's told me some things about why he acted as he did, and I've told him he'd better not even entertain the idea of messing you around again. But I honestly don't think he will. After his time away, he seems... reformed isn't the right word, but perhaps fixed." He shook his head. "Anyway, I don't want to give the game away, as it's meant to be a surprise. Go and talk to him. I'll watch Luke." Holly opened and closed her mouth a few times, but no words came out. So she decided to take her dad's advice. She had no idea what was going on, but Dad had told her to give Rich a chance. He deserved that at least. Rich was more terrified than he had ever been in his life, except for when he'd found himself unable to save his brother, but he wouldn't think about that now. He needed all his energy to focus on the here and now, on him and Holly, and what he was about to do. "Are your eyes still closed?" he asked. "Yes, Rich, but how long will this take? I don't like not being able to see the road." "Not long, I promise. In fact, we're nearly there." "Okay, but why can't you tell me what this is about?" He glanced at her profile in the passenger seat of the car, and his heart leapt. She was so beautiful, and so precious to him. "I want you to see something, and if I give you any clues it will ruin the surprise." He took the next turning and drove along the narrow country lane. Holly exclaimed as the car passed over a large bump. The road would need to be evened out, but he hadn't had a chance to see to that yet. When he cut the engine, he released his seatbelt, then undid Holly's. "Keep your eyes closed until I tell you to look, all right?" "All right." He got out, then went around to her side and opened her door. Taking her hands, he led her around to the front of the vehicle. "Before you open your eyes, I need to tell you something." "I'm listening." In the morning light, her cheeks had a soft peachy glow. Her hair shone with health, and her fair eyelashes fluttered on her cheeks. Her lips were slightly parted, and her chest rose and fell quickly, suggesting that she was nervous, or excited, or both. He experienced an overwhelming urge to pull her into his arms and kiss her, to carry her inside and make love to her. But that would be too much too soon. He had to see how she reacted to what he'd done first. He had come to a realization over recent weeks. It had crept in at first, as he'd spent time with Holly and Luke, watching her with their son and observing her hard work at the vineyard. He had known that he still cared for her, that he was sorry for hurting her and would take it back if he could. But it was more than that. More than he could understand. More than he could control. More than he could convey with words. He hoped his actions would do his feelings justice. Telling Holly how he felt wouldn't be enough. He needed to show her. A wood pigeon cooed in the trees bordering the property, and the gentle breeze rustled through the leaves. The air was sweet with the scent of freshly mown grass, making Rich think of summer days gone by, of a time when life was full of potential and freedom from pain. Surely it could be that good again. Better, perhaps. There were possibilities for happiness ahead, if they only chose to take advantage of them. "Okay, open your eyes." He watched as Holly slowly looked around. She blinked at first as her eyes adjusted to the bright light. Then a line appeared between her eyebrows. Rich's stomach clenched, and he held his breath. "What are we?" Why are we—" Holly shook her head, then met his gaze. "Is this some kind of joke?" Holly didn't understand what was happening. Was Rich being really mean? "If this is a joke, Rich, it's not funny." He took hold of her shoulders and shook his head. "No, Holes, this is no joke." She slid out of his grip and walked closer to Plumtree Cottage. She had been impressed by the renovations on the cottages up at Greenacres, but this surpassed what she had seen there. The isolated house was more beautiful than she had ever seen it before. It had been given a fresh coat of white paint, and the broken windows had been replaced with small panes that sparkled in the sunlight. There were new shutters at the windows, painted duck-egg blue, to match the frames and the front door with its V-frame portico. Pink and red roses climbed the trellises either side of the door, and their scent filled the air, heady and sweet, potent with summer. "Someone has bought the cottage." It wasn't a question, and Holly felt as though her heart was breaking anew. "And done all of this?" "Yes." Rich pulled something from his pocket and took her hand. "What?" She looked down to see that he had pressed a key into her palm. "You?" He nodded. "I bought the cottage, just as we should have done last year. I bought it for you and for our son." He led her through the gate and along the path towards the door. Everything felt surreal, as if she was dreaming and could wake up at any moment. She pushed the key into the lock with a trembling hand, and the door swung inwards, revealing freshly painted walls. The hallway they'd walked through only weeks before was clean and fresh, the flagstone floor scrubbed clean, and the woodwork of the skirting boards and the staircase sanded down and varnished. It was perfect. The kitchen had been cleaned, the cupboard doors replaced, the fireplace filled with logs and pine cones waiting to be lit. There was a solid oak table with 4 chairs, a vase of colourful sweet peas and pure white gypsophila at its centre. She followed Rich back through the cottage to the hallway. As they climbed the stairs, none of the boards creaked as they had when they'd viewed the house last year, and Holly realised that the whole staircase had been replaced. On the landing, they turned left, and Rich showed her the 2 bedrooms on this side of the house, both with neutral colour schemes, but without furniture, waiting for the occupants to decide what to fill them with. They retraced their steps, and Holly looked into a family bathroom with a white roll-top tub, walk-in shower, sink and toilet. Further along, they entered another double room. This one had a cast-iron double bed, with the mattress still in its plastic packaging. There were 2 double wardrobes in limed oak and 2 chests of drawers. Next to the bed were small side tables with silver lamps with cream shades. "One more," Rich said, as he went to the next door and opened it, then stood back. Holly entered the room first and sighed. It was beautiful. There were wooden floorboards and a soft cream rug, a pine cot against the far wall, with a mobile of farmyard animals hanging over it. On top of the brand-new mattress was a bundle of bedding. Next to the window was a changing table, with wicker baskets underneath it. She could make out a nappy packet sticking out of the top of one of them. There was also a pine chest of drawers and a matching cupboard. Rich stepped forward and wound the dial on the mobile, and the animals danced in a circle, bobbing and swaying, as a familiar lullaby filled the room. "What do you think?" he asked, and she noted the uncertainty in his face. In her surprise, she hadn't given anything away, and he needed to know how she felt. But she wasn't sure. Not at all. Everything she thought she'd known about Rich and about how things had gone last year had changed. She'd thought they were rebuilding their relationship, but hadn't been sure in what way. As parents, yes. But as anything else? She'd wondered, considered, yearned at times for something more, but feared it too. Because with love came vulnerability. And now he'd done this. Created this perfect cottage of her dreams, renovated, renewed, and given new life, all ready for her and Luke to move into. It could be their home. "Don't say anything yet," Rich held up a hand. "Come and see outside." They made their way down the stairs and through the kitchen to the back door. We sorted out the garden so Luke can play out here as he gets bigger." Rich's smile wobbled, and part of Holly wanted to hug him for what he'd done. But another part feared he'd take that as an acceptance of him and the cottage. She didn't know what he wanted from her, so she was hesitant to react in case her reaction was wrong. The back garden had been cleared of junk, the grass mowed, the flower beds weeded and composted and filled with bedding plants that created a rainbow of flowers. To one side of the path was a wooden swing set, with a baby swing, and one for an older child. Holly walked to the new 4-foot wooden fence that separated the garden from the field behind it and peered over the top. The field stretched away from this secure space, bright with colour. To the right was a summer house that hadn't been there before either. She opened the doors and inhaled the woody smell, admiring the wicker sofa and 2 chairs with fat lavender cushions and a cream chenille throw that matched the curtains at the small windows. From one window she could see where the sky brightened as the land gave way to the sea. The coast was so close, and she knew that when the wind blew the right way, she'd be able to sit in here with the doors open and smell the ocean. It was all so tempting, all so perfect. If Rich had walked into her head and taken a photograph of her dreams, he couldn't have got any closer than this. Back in the garden she turned around, trying to take in all the changes, all the improvements. She was dizzy with wonder and something else. Hope. Rich had clearly worked very hard since purchasing the property, and it was all ready for a family to move in. Ready for a family to be happy. Ready to become a home. She turned to him, and her heart ached for the way he was gnawing at his bottom lip, for the way he was standing so stiffly, his broad shoulders in his blue and white checked shirt tense. He tucked his hands into his jeans pockets, then pulled them out again. He was nervous, worried, doubting himself. Holly never wanted to see him anything other than happy. She never had wanted anything other than that for him. She loved him still. She couldn't doubt that any longer. She had tried to deny it to herself, to be rational about her feelings for him, but her heart always won. In spite of everything that had happened last year, she loved him more than ever. But she had another responsibility. She had a son who deserved her love and her dedication. She had loved Rich completely, but it hadn't been enough for him. Now she couldn't give him as much as she had before, because Luke needed her attention. What if she got back with Rich and he wanted more than she could give? Yes, he had changed. He did seem better prepared to be the man she needed, but it didn't mean that he was completely healed. How could anyone come back from what he'd been through and be whole again? Everyone ended up damaged by life in some way, but Rich had been shattered by the loss of his brother, and she'd been unable to fix him. Her heart was breaking. She wanted to help him rebuild his life, but she would be risking not only her own feelings, but those of her child. Holly was a mother first. That much had changed. She couldn't take the risk of ruining the new life they had at Greenacres, of losing what she had begun to create for Luke. She swallowed hard. It's beautiful, Rich. Absolutely perfect. Her throat tightened and her vision blurred. I love it. How I wish... Holly, he stepped closer. Please don't say no. The cottage was your dream. I ruined that before, but now I want to make it up to you. You can accept it without having to accept me too. I just want you and Luke to live here, for him to grow up here. It's so close to your dad and Granny, and not far from Penhallow Sands. You'll have some privacy from the visitors to the vineyard, but you'll also be able to get there quickly whenever you choose. I can't take this from you, it's too much. If you want it, we can sort something out. I need to pay maintenance to support Luke anyway, and I can stay on with Mum and Dad while you and Luke live here. Oh, Rich, if only you'd wanted this before. If only things hadn't been so complicated for us back then. I know. I wish with all my heart that I'd been in the right place to give you what you wanted and needed. I wish I'd been ready to give you everything. He took her hand and raised it to his lips, then held it there, squeezing her fingers. When she looked up, his eyes were closed. I'm so sorry for the past, Holly. I'm so sorry for letting you down. She moved closer to him and hugged him tight, her arms encircling his waist as he embraced her. He was warm and strong, his scent fresh and peppery, reminding her of a walk in the woods following a storm. He felt so familiar, so good, and her whole being called out for him. I want to give you everything, Holly. His lips were against her hair, and as he spoke, it tickled, sending delightful shivers down her spine. I want to make you happy, and to give you your dream home. The words dragged her from sensation, from emotion and into reality. Exactly, she said as she pulled away, fighting against her desire to stay close to him. That's the problem. He frowned, confusion filling his eyes. You just said it, Rich. My dream home. It was my dream to own this cottage, never yours. You went along with it, but your heart wasn't in it the way mine was. I should never have tried to persuade you to buy it with me. We were fine when we lived with our parents, and you didn't have to grow up and face adulthood. But when I pushed for us to buy this place, it was too much for you. It was almost like you didn't want to grow up, like you wanted to stay as you were when Dean died. She covered her mouth as a sob burst out. I can't do this, Rich. I'm so sorry. The pain in his eyes broke her heart. She turned and ran from the cottage, along the path towards Greenacres, ignoring his calls for her to come back, to talk, to listen. What he'd done was so wonderful, and she loved him for trying and for caring. But it was simply too late. Chapter 18. Rich sank onto the wicker sofa in the summer house and stared at the cottage. How had he got it so wrong? Not only had he done the wrong thing by buying the cottage, he let Holly believe that he didn't share her dream of buying it in the first place. He was an abysmal human being. He felt as though his world had fallen apart, and he deserved it. Buying the cottage for Holly and Luke was meant to be a way of making amends, of starting again. He'd spoken to Bruce, who had warned him that it might not be the best approach. But he hadn't wanted to listen, had been convinced that he was doing the right thing by making such a grand gesture. It had been his secret project, and as he'd worked on the cottage and overseen the renovations, he'd smiled at the hope that had filled his heart. Happiness with Holly and Luke had seemed possible at last. Holly had loved the cottage and wanted to start their life together there. He hadn't been as enthusiastic about it as she had been, but it didn't mean that he hadn't wanted to move in with her. He had simply been afraid of not being enough for her. And he'd felt so guilty about living when his brother's life had been cut tragically short. Holly was right in saying that it was as though Rich wanted to stay in the past, as if he didn't want to grow up because Dean never would. That guilt had eaten away at him and prevented him from fully committing to Holly and to their future. But now he could see that, and he wanted to show her that he was ready to move forward, to devote himself to her. But she had just walked out of the cottage, and terrifyingly quite possibly out of his life. If she went back to Exeter now, he knew his heart would shatter into 1,000 pieces. He buried his face in his hands and tried to shut out the world around him, but he couldn't push away his pain and fear. They sat on his shoulders like sacks of cement, dragging him down, threatening to suffocate him. He knew he couldn't allow that to happen. If he sank again, he might not come back up. He had to be positive about things, to salvage what he could from the situation. He loved Holly, he really did. But if she couldn't love him the way she used to, then he would simply have to accept that and carry on. He would be a good dad to his son, and he would do his best to be a friend to Holly. She was a wonderful person, and she deserved that at least. He wouldn't wallow in his sadness or feel sorry for himself. He had things to do, a life to live, and he wanted to set a good example to Luke. He had failed his brother, and he wouldn't repeat that by failing his son too. He knew where he needed to go to speak to someone, just the two of them. It was time to take the final steps in his healing process. Holly reached Greenacres and bent over to try to catch her breath. She'd run most of the way through the fields and along the gravel paths, and now her lungs were burning and her feet were throbbing. but it was nothing compared to the pain in her heart. She had been unable to outrun that. Poor Rich. He'd done something wonderful, made a romantic, caring gesture, and Holly had turned her back on him. Fresh tears sprang into her eyes, so she wiped them away and straightened up. She knew why she'd made the decision, and it was for the best, but leaving him behind was the most difficult thing she had ever done. She'd hoped that she'd be able to get up to her room so she could wash her face and calm down before she had to face her dad or Granny, but the back door opened, so she prepared to explain her windswept state and red eyes. When a small grey dog emerged, she realised someone was letting Gellert out. He spotted her immediately and ran to her, bouncing up and down as he sniffed at her legs and hands. She crouched down to let him say hello properly, and he paused, gazing up at her face, then tilted his head to one side. "Hello, boy." Holly stroked his head and his soft ears, then opened her arms and hugged him. He sniffed at her ear, then gave it a lick. "Hey, Gellert, no ear snogs," she laughed in spite of her sadness. He placed his paws on her shoulders and licked her cheeks, cleaning her salty tears away. The sweetness of his gesture made her cry harder, and before she knew it, she was sobbing into his thick fur. When she finally came up for air, he looked at her knowingly. "You're such a good boy, you know that?" she asked. He wagged his tail and gazed right into her eyes, as if he could see down into her soul. "There's no way I can let you go now, is there?" she whispered, appreciating his reassuring warmth, his willingness to listen without judging. "I'm glad you came into my life, Gellert, and I promise to be a good dog mum to you." He gave her cheek another lick, then lay down next to her with his chin on his paws. "Life is full of ups and downs, Gellert, and right now I'm not feeling too good. I had to make a decision, and I'm not fully certain that it was the right one." He shifted to rest his chin on her leg. "We have some thinking to do, don't we?" Holly ran her hand over Gellert's fur, taking comfort from his presence and devotion. Whatever happened with Rich and the cottage, she would manage. She would find a way. Especially now she had a little canine friend who'd imprinted his paw print on her heart. Rich parked outside the church and cut the engine. It wasn't as though this was the first time he'd come here since it had happened, but it was the first time he'd come here convinced that he knew how to put things right. As right as they could be, that was. He got out of the car, then let himself in through the gate, heading along the path around the building to the graveyard beyond. The breeze had picked up, and the swishing of the leaves on the trees reminded him of whispering. The sound kept him moving forward. He'd learnt to live in the moment, to listen to his gut and the world around him. And right now, everything was telling him that this was what he had to do. He passed rows of graves, including that of Holly's grandpa. He ran his eyes over the headstones, but didn't allow himself to digest the words. Not wanting to allow other people's loss into his heart. Everyone lost loved ones. It was part of life. But you had to go on. The alternative was giving up, pretending to live, but in reality drifting in a haze of pain. Rich had done that, but not any longer. His self-pity had hurt Holly, but it wouldn't happen again. He would not risk losing his son too. He stopped at the end of a row, close to the hedge that bordered the graveyard, and lowered his gaze to the grey headstone. How on earth had 20 years passed since his brother had gone? How was it possible that Rich was 34? Time really did wait for no one, and the next 20 years might pass just as quickly, which was why it was important that he used them wisely. In 20 years his son would be an adult. Dean had not been given the gift of time, so Rich wouldn't waste another second. He crouched down in front of the headstone and rested his elbows on his knees, then cleared his throat. This is difficult." A squawk off to his left made him jump, but when he looked up, he saw it was just a crow taking flight. "Hi, Dean." He paused as if waiting for a reply, which he knew was ridiculous, because his brother was long gone. He wasn't even sure that he could remember how his voice had sounded anymore, and that saddened him. "I came to say hello. I know it's been a long time since I spoke to you like this, but I couldn't face it back then. when it happened, and then time went by and I felt foolish thinking about coming here alone. I was an idiot. And to be honest, I was worried that I would lose it. Break down, you know. So instead I carried on and tried to bury my feelings about you and what happened. But it was so hard to do. And as with everything that we try to bury, that we try to avoid dealing with, there's only so long we can do that before it eats away at us. Losing you ate away at me, Dean. You were my buddy, my little brother. And I let you down. I'm so sorry, mate. If I could go back to that day and change how things unfolded, I would do it in a second. I meant to come here sooner after I got back, but I've been so busy with work and the cottage and the work up at Greenacres, and with my son. He closed his eyes and pictured his brother, his slightly rounded face still carrying the softness of childhood, and his smile so wide it could light up a room. Dean had only been a year younger than him, and almost the same height, but he was far more innocent. He saw the good in everyone, whereas Rich was more wary. Perhaps it was the big brother thing, the firstborn child's instinct that meant he had grown up wanting to protect Dean. But he'd failed at that. Abysmally. He'd let Dean down as badly as it was possible to do. When he opened his eyes again, a bright red ladybird was crawling along the top of the headstone, going about its business as if it hadn't a care in the world. Mum and Dad, they miss you every day. Mum says she feels you around, but Dad pulls a face when she says it, as if he's not convinced. You know, Dad, a man of few words. He's like a closed book most of the time, and I know it's how he deals with things. Perhaps you are with us. I don't know. Perhaps it's just Mum's way of comforting herself. I do wonder what you'd be like now, Dean, and what you'd be doing. Would you be a vet? You were always so good with animals and had so much patience and compassion. You were a much better person than I was. If it had been me who'd gone, then you would have treated the woman you loved far better than I did. I'm sure of it. He gave a rueful laugh. I can't believe I have a son now. Me! I'm a dad. Imagine that, Dean. Holly was pregnant when she left last year, and I had no idea. I was always so wrapped up in myself, and now it seems that I've lost her for good. I made a grand gesture, bought the cottage for her and Luke, and she turned it down. I'm not surprised, though. I was such an idiot. He ran his hands through his hair. I think I've always been an idiot. Anyway, bloody hell, I come to speak to you and to tell you how sorry I am, and I end up telling you about my life. A life you don't get to live. Dean, I'm so sorry I failed you. A tear rolled down his cheek and dropped from his chin. His vision blurred, so he rubbed his eyes with the heels of his hands. I don't expect you to forgive me, Dean. I don't know if you'd be able to, even if you could. But I wanted you to know that I'm trying to forgive myself, and I hope you're okay with that.
End of CD 6.